Welcome, and thank you for joining The Sleepy Scientist. Tonight, as you settle into a comfortable spot and let the day fade into the background, we're going to drift into a gentle exploration of how the moon moves the tides. That soft glow in the sky, something so constant and familiar, has the power to pull entire oceans. It is a quiet force, working without sound, shaping the rhythms of our world. Before we begin, I would love to know where you're listening from. Are you by the sea, where the tides rise and fall each day? Or perhaps you're far inland, imagining the distant pull of the moon across the water? Share your corner of the world in the comments. It is always fascinating to see the reach of this little journey we take together. And if you find these videos calming, a gentle way to end your day, please consider giving this one a like and subscribing to the channel. To those of you who have already subscribed, thank you. You are the reason these quiet explorations keep flowing like a tide of their own. I hope this video does not prove so interesting that it keeps you wide awake, but if it does, then perhaps it is some comfort to know that while sleep is delayed, at least the moon may be teaching you something as you listen. So, as the night deepens and the moon climbs a little higher, let us ask a simple question with a surprisingly profound answer. How can something so distant move the very seas of our planet? The tides might seem like an ordinary part of the background world. Waves arriving, waves retreating, the shore slowly breathing in and out. Yet beneath that steady rhythm lies one of the most elegant demonstrations of physics at work. The moon, silent and silver above us, is not just a companion lighting our night sky. It is a sculptor of oceans, a conductor guiding vast bodies of water with its invisible hand. Understanding the tides is like unravelling a layered story. It is not only about gravity, though gravity is the main character. It is about the spin of the earth, the pull of the sun, the shapes of the seas themselves, and even the tilt of continents that channel water into unique patterns. The rise and fall of the tide is not a simple pulse, but a complex dance played out on every shore. For ancient peoples, this rhythm was a mystery tinged with awe. The ocean seemed to listen to the moon as though obeying some celestial command. Sailors timed their voyages to the cycles of high and low water, fishermen waited for the tides to turn before casting their nets, and poets found in their ebb and flow a perfect metaphor for change. Even today, though we can predict the tides with satellites and supercomputers, the feeling remains that the ocean's alive, moving to the music of the moon, and tides do more than shape coastlines or dictate the daily rhythm of beaches. They have influenced the course of life itself. Early organisms evolved in the intertidal zones where water came and went, forcing them to adapt or perish. Even the slow drift of the moon away from Earth, a process measured in mere centimetres each year, continues to reshape our planet's future. In this journey, we will not only explore the science behind tides, but also the culture, the history, and the quiet poetry they bring. By the end, the next time you see the moon hanging above the horizon, you may feel its pull a little differently, knowing that it is not just a light in the sky. It is the reason the ocean breathes. So let us begin by stepping into the mystery itself. What exactly is the moon doing to the Earth that makes oceans rise and fall like a sleeping giant's breath? Gravity is one of those quiet forces that rarely makes a fuss, but without it the universe would be nothing more than a lonely scatter of particles drifting aimlessly. Every planet, every star, every person resting their head on a pillow right now is bound together by this invisible thread. The moon, hanging serenely in the night sky, is bound to Earth by that same force, and in return it tugs delicately on the oceans below. This is where the story of the tides truly begins. To picture what is happening, imagine Earth wrapped in an enormous flexible oceanic blanket. The moon's gravity reaches out and pulls that blanket ever so slightly toward it. The result is a bulge of water on the side of Earth that faces the moon. But here's the surprising part. There is also a bulge on the opposite side of the planet, as though the oceans are stretching in two directions at once. It is as if the Earth were a ball being gently squeezed in the middle, with the water at either end puffing outward. This might sound counterintuitive at first. Why would the oceans bulge on the far side, away from the moon's pull? The explanation lies in the balance of forces. On the near side, the moon's gravity is stronger, pulling the water toward it. On the far side, however, the water is being flung outward because it is not pulled quite as strongly as the solid Earth itself. The Earth is essentially pulled a little harder than the distant ocean water, creating a relative effect that pushes the water outward. It is a strange dance of attraction and inertia, like two partners tugging on opposite ends of a rope. If you are imagining all the water sloshing around like soup in a tilted bowl, it is worth pausing. The oceans are vast and they cannot simply spill from one end of the planet to the other every 12 hours. Instead, the tides are subtle but immense. The bulges caused by the moon's pull are only a metre or so high in the open ocean. What turns them into dramatic rises and falls of several metres along coasts is the shape of the land, the depth of the water, and the way those bulges are funneled by geography. But at the heart of it all is the gentle hand of gravity pulling on trillions of tons of seawater. Now, why does inertia matter here? Inertia is the tendency of things to keep doing what they are already doing. A car keeps rolling forward even when you take your foot off the pedal. A spinning top keeps twirling until friction slows it down, and the oceans, being unimaginably massive, resist sudden changes. While the moon pulls at the water, Earth itself is also spinning beneath those bulges. It takes about 24 hours for Earth to complete a rotation, and during that time, any given patch of coastline will move under first one bulge, then the other. This is why most places on Earth experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day. You might think of it as a cosmic conveyor belt. The tidal bulges are roughly fixed relative to the moon, but because Earth spins, coastlines move through them, experiencing the rise and fall as the hours pass. If Earth were not rotating, the bulges would simply sit in place, and life on the planet would be very different indeed. Thankfully, we are granted this steady rhythm, a lunar heartbeat that quietly marks the passage of time along every shore. Of course, the reality is slightly messier than the neat picture of 2 perfect bulges. Earth is not a smooth ball, and the oceans do not cover it evenly. Continents block the flow of water, ocean basins trap and amplify movements, and local geography warps the tide into all sorts of shapes. Yet no matter how distorted the rhythm becomes, its source remains the same, the moon's gravitational embrace. It is astonishing to realize that such a small celestial body exerts such an influence. The moon is only about 1/6 the size of Earth, and has just 1/80th of its mass. Yet because it is relatively close, roughly 380,000 kilometers away, it has a profound effect on our planet. The Sun, far larger and more massive, also influences tides, but its effect is weaker because distance diminishes gravity's tug. The Moon, being our closest neighbour, is the one that gives the oceans their regular rhythm. The science of tides can sometimes sound intimidating, but at its core, it is a story of balance. Gravity pulls, inertia resists, and the rotation of Earth complicates the pattern. The result is not chaos, but a graceful order. The oceans respond as if they are listening to a conductor's baton, following a score written in invisible lines of force stretching between Earth and Moon. For those who like analogies, picture standing in a crowded dance hall. Someone gives the signal, and the crowd begins to sway in time with the music. Each person may move differently depending on where they stand, but the collective rhythm flows through them all. The moon is that signal and the oceans are the dancers. It may not be a perfect waltz, sometimes it is more like a shuffle, but the beat is steady and the partners never tire. There is something wonderfully humbling in this. The same gravitational force that keeps your feet on the ground is, on a planetary scale, pulling at entire oceans. You could be standing on a beach watching waves lap at your toes, and those very waves are being influenced by the moon floating silently above. The connection is both ordinary and extraordinary. a reminder that we are part of a vast system where even the quietest forces ripple outward. One might ask, if the moon pulls on the oceans, why does it not pull us upward as well? After all, you too are made mostly of water. The answer is scale. The difference in gravitational pull across the height of a human body is far too small to notice. The oceans, however, cover the planet and are free to shift, making them sensitive to even slight differences. So, while your evening cup of tea will not start sloshing in rhythm with the tides, the great seas will always respond. And here lies the charm of the moon's gravitational embrace. It is not a violent force. It does not whip the oceans into storms or send waves crashing over mountains. Instead, it is a patient tug, a gentle insistence that water must rise and fall in a rhythm as old as the earth itself. In that rhythm, civilizations have lived, creatures have evolved, and coastlines have been carved. The story of the tides begins with this invisible pull, a force so subtle that it goes unnoticed most of the time, yet so powerful that it sculpts the daily life of the planet. Every high tide and every low tide is a quiet reminder that gravity never sleeps, and that the moon, far from being a distant ornament in the night sky, is a partner bound to us, guiding the oceans with its unseen hand. If you have ever spent a day by the sea, you may have noticed something curious. The shoreline is never still. The water creeps forward to cover rocks and sand, then slowly retreats again, exposing tidal pools and leaving seaweed draped across the shore. This rise and fall is not a one-off event but a repeating cycle, as steady as a clock, with most coasts experiencing 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. The daily tide cycle is one of Earth's most reliable rhythms, written into the turning of the planet and the steady pull of the moon. To understand why the pattern works this way, imagine Earth as a spinning globe wrapped in 2 watery bulges, one facing the moon and one on the far side. As the Earth rotates, any given location on its surface moves through those bulges. When a coastline is aligned with the bulge, the tide is high. When it is between the bulges, the tide is low. Since Earth takes roughly 24 hours to complete a full spin, a place will pass through both bulges and both troughs in that time, giving 2 high tides and 2 low tides. This is what scientists call a semi-diurnal tide, meaning half day. But things are never quite that simple. Because the moon is also moving around Earth, the cycle does not reset exactly every 24 hours. Instead, the tides arrive on a lunar schedule, which is a little longer. High tide at a particular beach today will not occur at precisely the same clock time tomorrow. Instead, it will be about 50 minutes later. This small difference comes from the fact that as Earth rotates, the moon itself has shifted a little along its orbit, and the oceans must catch up to its new position. For those who live by the water, this slow drifting of the tide schedule is a familiar rhythm, one that links daily life to the movements of the heavens. Semi-diurnal tides are the most common pattern, shaping coastlines across much of the world. The Atlantic Ocean is a classic example, where places like Boston, Lisbon and Dakar all see 2 highs and 2 lows in a regular sequence. If you were to stand on the pier in Boston Harbour, you could watch the tide rise and fall by several meters twice a day, revealing muddy flats at low tide and hiding them beneath water at high tide. Yet not every coast follows this neat rule. Some places experience diurnal tides, with only 1 high tide and 1 low tide in each day. This happens when the geometry of the ocean basin and the pull of the moon combine in such a way that one of the tidal bulges dominates. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the best-known examples. In places like Pensacola, Florida, the sea rises once and falls once each day, as if the ocean had decided it preferred a simpler schedule. For those living there, the pattern is just as predictable, though very different from the twice-daily rhythm elsewhere. Then there are mixed tides, a kind of in-between rhythm where the 2 high tides are not equal in height. The Pacific coast of North America is a striking example. In San Diego, California, 1 high tide may tower over the other, leaving beachgoers and fishermen with a more complex timetable to follow. Mixed tides remind us that the ocean is not governed by neat equations alone, but by a blend of physics and geography, where local shapes and depths bend the rhythm into unique forms. The variety of tides across the world highlights how sensitive the oceans are to their surroundings. The moon and the sun provide the pull, but the way that pull is expressed depends on the basins that hold the water. Narrow inlets, wide shelves, deep troughs, and even the resonance of waves bouncing within a bay can all modify the cycle. In some harbours, tides may be exaggerated into dramatic rises and falls. In others, they may be muted until they are barely noticeable. For people who live by the sea, these cycles are not abstract ideas but daily realities. Fishermen along the Atlantic coast plan their departures and returns by the tide tables. In parts of Southeast Asia, entire floating markets rise and fall with the water, adjusting their activity to the rhythm of the sea. In Northern Europe, walking across mudflats at low tide is a traditional activity, but one that requires a careful eye on the clock, because the returning tide is steady and unrelenting. The daily cycle of tides is also an excellent reminder that while Earth's rotation is constant, the relationship with the moon adds layers of complexity. The ocean is not a passive blanket of water, but a dynamic system, responding to the smallest shifts in timing and alignment. This is why predicting tides requires more than a simple glance at the sky. Even today, with satellites and computers, local observations remain crucial for accuracy. It is also worth noting that the tide does not rise and fall like a switch being flipped. Instead, it moves gradually, with currents flowing in and out of bays, harbours and estuaries. These tidal currents can be strong enough to shape coastlines, carry nutrients to marine ecosystems, and even create challenges for ships. In some areas, the incoming tide rushes inland like a river in reverse, while the outgoing tide drains vast stretches of land in a matter of hours. Despite all these variations, the basic pattern remains consistent. Two bulges of water, created by the moon's pull and Earth's rotation, sweep around the globe. Most coasts meet both bulges each day, some meet only one, and others meet them unevenly. The result is a planet where no shoreline is ever truly still, but always breathing in and out in a rhythm tied to the sky. There is a certain beauty in this universality. Whether you're standing on a rocky shore in Ireland, a sandy beach in Florida, or a tidal flat in Japan, the cycle connects you to the same moon. Even if the heights and timings differ, the principle is the same. Earth and its oceans are bound to their companion in space, and every day that bond is written in the rise and fall of the sea. It is easy to overlook the tides, to think of them as background scenery to a walk along the coast. Yet once you understand the daily cycle, you start to see them differently. Each wave that creeps higher onto the sand, each stretch of beach that vanishes beneath the water, is part of a pattern shaped by cosmic forces. The moon is never silent, even when it appears still. It is always tugging, always guiding, and the oceans are always listening. The daily tide cycle is therefore more than a curiosity of physics. It is a connection between the turning of the planet, the orbit of the moon, and the lived experience of people across the world. It reminds us that even the most ordinary sights, like water rising and falling on the shore, are part of a much larger story written in gravity and motion, and perhaps that is what makes it so quietly remarkable. A clock that does not tick but breathes. The moon may be the star of the tidal story, but it does not dance alone. Hovering in the background, far more massive yet much more distant, the sun also exerts its pull on Earth's oceans. Although it is almost 400 times farther away than the moon, its gravitational influence is powerful enough to join the rhythm of the tides. What makes this duet fascinating is not just the sheer scale of it, but the way the sun and the moon sometimes work in harmony and sometimes gently cancel one another out. The result is a pattern of stronger and weaker tides that repeat with comforting regularity. To begin, picture the Earth, the moon, and the sun lined up in a straight row. This happens during two familiar lunar phases: the new moon, when the moon sits between Earth and the sun, and the full moon, when Earth sits between the two. In either case, The gravitational forces of the sun and the moon align, tugging the oceans in the same direction. The result is what we call a spring tide. Despite the name, this has nothing to do with the season of spring. The word comes from the idea of the tide springing forth with unusual strength. During a spring tide, high tides are higher and low tides are lower, creating a more dramatic range. If you were to stand on the coast during a spring tide, you might notice the water climbing higher up the beach than usual, or draining further back during low tide, revealing stretches of sand and rock rarely seen. Fishermen and sailors through history have known these days well, timing their activities to take advantage of the stronger flows. Even today, spring tides can shape coastal life, influencing everything from the behaviour of crabs and shellfish to the timing of harbour operations. Now imagine a different alignment. The moon is at its first quarter, or last quarter phase, appearing as a half-lit disk in the night sky. In this position, the sun and moon are at right angles to one another with respect to Earth. Their gravitational pulls are not combining but competing, each tugging the oceans in different directions. The result is a neap tide. Here, the range between high and low water is much smaller than usual. High tides do not reach as high, and low tides do not fall as far. The ocean, in effect, is caught between two bosses giving contradictory instructions, and the result is a compromise. Neap tides bring their own quiet fascination. They occur about a week after a spring tide, creating a steady 2-week rhythm in which the strength of the tide waxes and wanes. For coastal communities, this rhythm has long been a natural calendar. Strong spring tides might be ideal for launching boats in shallow waters, while gentler neap tides could make certain crossings easier, or expose tidal flats for gathering shellfish. Nature also responds. In estuaries, fish and crabs time their movements to these cycles, maximising their chances of survival in the ever-changing landscape of salt and sand. The interplay between sun and moon illustrates something profound about gravity. It is not a switch that turns on and off, but a constant force that can add or subtract depending on geometry. The sun's gravitational pull on Earth is enormous, yet because it is so distant, the difference in pull between the near and far sides of Earth is smaller than the difference created by the moon. This is why the moon is the main driver of tides. But when the two forces line up, their combined influence becomes undeniable. One of the remarkable aspects of spring and neap tides is their predictability. Unlike storms or winds, which can change without warning, these cycles are locked to the lunar phases. Astronomers in ancient civilizations could forecast them with surprising accuracy simply by watching the shape of the moon. Even without modern instruments, farmers and fishermen knew that a full or new moon would bring especially strong tides, while a half moon would bring the weakest. This knowledge was passed down through generations, woven into traditions and folklore. Modern science has refined these predictions to extraordinary precision. Tide tables today can tell you not only the times of high and low water, but also the expected height, years into the future. Yet behind all the data and algorithms lies the same simple truth. Two celestial bodies working together or against one another in their pull on the oceans. The cosmic choreography of sun and moon is as dependable as a heartbeat, and just as vital to life on Earth. For many, the most striking reminder of spring tides comes when they combine with other forces. During a storm, when strong winds drive water toward the shore, a spring tide can make flooding far worse, pushing water levels to dangerous extremes. Conversely, during a neap tide, the weaker range may help buffer against surges, at least a little. These interactions highlight how tides are never isolated, but part of a wider system of weather, geography, and celestial mechanics. There is also a poetic quality to the idea that the sun, the great giver of light and warmth, joins the moon in shaping the seas. Though we tend to think of the sun's influence as blazing and immediate, its gravitational hand is subtle, reaching across vast emptiness to nudge the water. The moon may be the closer partner, but the sun ensures that the dance of the tides is rich with variation, never repeating itself exactly in the same way. In some cultures, this cosmic partnership has been celebrated in myth. The sun and moon are often seen as opposing siblings, lovers or rivals, locked in an eternal relationship that shapes the world below. When their forces align, the ocean responds with great surges. When they oppose each other, the sea becomes calmer. Though ancient storytellers lacked the equations of physics, their imagination captured the essence of what we now measure with science. Standing on a beach during a spring tide, watching waves reach further than expected, one cannot help but feel a connection to these celestial alignments. The sight is not just a quirk of geography, but a direct consequence of cosmic geometry. Every ripple that laps at the shore is part of a story being written by two distant bodies, moving in their predictable paths. The moon provides the steady rhythm, while the sun adds a second beat, turning the simple pulse of tides into something more like a melody. And so, the daily rise and fall of the ocean is not only the work of one celestial neighbour, but the result of a duet. The moon leads, but the sun joins, sometimes amplifying, sometimes softening, always ensuring that the oceans never quite repeat themselves from one day to the next. The cycle of spring and neap tides gives texture to the rhythm of the sea, a slow alternation of strength and gentleness that has shaped ecosystems, guided human activity, and added depth to the endless conversation between earth and sky. The tides are often described as the work of the moon and the sun, but the oceans themselves have a great deal to say in the matter. The shape of Earth's seas, the outline of its coasts, and even the hidden depths of the seabed determine how those celestial tugs are expressed. If the moon provides the rhythm, the oceans are the instruments, and just like violins, drums, or flutes, each basin produces its own sound. Some coasts boom with dramatic rises and falls, while others barely whisper a change. One of the most famous demonstrations of this is the Bay of Fundy, located between the Canadian provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. This long, funnel-shaped bay is legendary for having the highest tidal range in the world. Water there can rise and fall by more than 15 metres, which is taller than a 5-storey building. When the tide rushes in, it fills the bay like a giant bathtub being tipped, and when it recedes, vast mudflats stretch into the distance. The secret lies in resonance. The Bay of Fundy's natural period of oscillation happens to match the timing of the tides, so each new surge of water arrives just as the previous one is sloshing back, amplifying the effect like a swing being pushed at just the right moment. Contrast this with the Mediterranean Sea. Though it is bordered by many countries and cultures, its tides are almost unnoticeable. In most places, the difference between high and low water is only a few centimetres. That is because the Mediterranean is nearly landlocked, connected to the Atlantic by the narrow Strait of Gibraltar. The tidal bulges from the moon, and sun cannot easily enter, and the basin itself does not resonate strongly with their timing. As a result, the Mediterranean seems to shrug off the moon's pull, its surface remaining calm while the rest of the world's oceans heave and sigh. In between these extremes are countless variations. The English Channel, with its narrowing funnel shape, magnifies the tide and creates powerful tidal currents. Ports like Saint-Malo in France have tides so high that harbour walls had to be designed to keep ships afloat, even at low water. Across the Atlantic, the estuaries of Britain also show dramatic changes, with rivers swelling and draining in step with the sea. Meanwhile, the Gulf of Mexico produces relatively small tides, usually less than half a metre, because its broad, rounded basin does not line up with the natural period of the tidal forces. Even the United States Pacific coast demonstrates striking contrasts. In Alaska, where narrow inlets cut deep into the land, tides can reach over 10 metres. Yet further south in California, the range is more modest, usually just a metre or two. The difference lies in the shapes of bays, shelves and channels, which either amplify the incoming tide or allow it to disperse. These geographic quirks make each stretch of coastline unique, giving local communities distinct experiences of the same cosmic forces. resonance plays a particularly fascinating role. Just as a child's swing soars higher when pushed in rhythm, certain bays and gulfs slosh dramatically when the timing of the tides matches their natural period. The Bay of Fundy is the textbook case, but similar effects occur in the Bristol Channel in Britain and in parts of Argentina's coast. When the timing is off, however, the push from the moon and sun does not line up with the basin's rhythm, and the result is muted. This is why two coasts at the same latitude can have utterly different tidal experiences. The seabed itself also matters. Shallow continental shelves allow tidal waves to build in height as they slow down, much like a line of traffic piling up near a bottleneck. Deeper waters, by contrast, let tidal energy pass with little fuss. That is why tides are most dramatic along continental margins and estuaries, while the open ocean sees only gentle swells of a metre or so. It is not that the moon forgets the middle of the sea, but that the energy has more room to spread. In narrow rivers and estuaries, tides can transform into tidal bores, waves that surge upstream against the current. The Severn River in England and the Qiantang River in China both produce famous examples, where walls of water rush inland with impressive force. These spectacles remind us that tides are not just vertical movements of water, but also horizontal flows, capable of reshaping entire landscapes and ecosystems. Globally, scientists map tides using satellites and networks of coastal gauges. The patterns are complex with amphidromic points, locations in the ocean where the tide barely changes at all, surrounded by regions where the tide circles around like a slow whirlpool. These points exist because the tidal wave, constrained by continents, reflects and interferes with itself, creating standing patterns. To the untrained eye, the map of global tides looks less like neat stripes, and more like a painter's swirl of colours, evidence of how geography sculpts the moon's simple pull into a world of variety. For coastal communities, these differences are not just curiosities but daily realities. In places with extreme tides, like parts of Canada or northern Europe, harbours are engineered with gates and locks to keep water levels manageable. Fishermen plan carefully around the rapid rise and fall, and entire ecosystems flourish on mudflats exposed at low tide. In more placid regions like the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, tides are barely a consideration, and life carries on with little thought for the moon's tug. The contrast is a reminder of how interconnected the forces are. Gravity provides the universal rule, but Earth's irregular surface translates it into local expression. It is like hearing a single melody played on 100 different instruments. The tune is the same, but the sound changes depending on who plays it. The moon, consistent in its orbit, gives the signal, but each ocean and bay interprets it in its own way. This is part of the quiet wonder of the tides. They are not simply predictable rises and falls, but a collaboration between sky and earth, between gravity and geography. When standing on a cliff above a roaring tidal channel, or sitting on a calm Mediterranean shore, it is easy to forget that the same moon is responsible for both. The difference lies in the shape of the water below, the hidden contours of the planet itself. The story of tides is therefore not just about celestial mechanics, but also about Earth's own character. Continents, shelves, and basins shape the response, amplifying or damping the effect, creating drama in one place and subtlety in another. Each coastline tells its own version of the lunar tale, and together they form a global chorus, varied but harmonious, each voice shaped by the ocean's shape. Long before science offered neat explanations with gravity and orbital mechanics, human beings stood on the edges of the sea and wondered why the waters came and went. To those early eyes, the connection between the moon and the tides must have seemed both obvious and mysterious. The moon appeared in the sky and the waters responded, swelling and sinking with a rhythm as steady as breathing. Without equations or satellites, people explained this rhythm in the language they knew best, stories of gods, spirits, and cosmic forces. In Mesopotamia, one of the cradles of civilization, the moon was more than just a light in the night sky. it was personified as the god Sin, or Nana, a powerful deity associated with cycles of time and fertility. The movement of water was easily woven into this divine rhythm. The rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates swelled and retreated with the seasons, and the moon became a clock in the heavens, a ruler of cycles both earthly and celestial. To the people of this land, the waxing and waning of the lunar disk was as much a divine act as it was a natural one, a heavenly signal that the world's waters moved in harmony with the gods. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Pytheas of Massalia, who lived around the 4th century BCE, was among the first known to note a direct link between the moon and the tides. He observed during his travels to the British Isles that the height of the tide seemed connected to the phases of the moon. While he didn't understand the mechanics, the observation itself was remarkable. The Greeks, however, also clothed the tides in myth. The god Poseidon ruled the seas, and his moods could churn them into storms or calm them into glassy stillness. The connection between Poseidon and his brother Helios, the sun god, with Selene or Artemis, goddesses of the moon, was an elegant way of framing how the heavens controlled the restless sea. Across the Indian Ocean, in Hindu tradition, the tides were woven into the great cosmic order. The moon was linked to Soma, a deity tied to life, cycles, and nourishment. In Vedic texts, Soma was not only the moon but also a divine elixir, one that sustained gods and mortals alike. The rise and fall of the tides could be seen as the world itself drinking in this rhythm. Here again, the moon was a vital part of life, regulating time, marking ritual calendars, and keeping the great machine of nature in motion. Further east, in China, the moon was long associated with water and feminine energy. The lunar goddess Chang'e was a symbol of beauty and immortality, and the moon was linked to fertility, cycles of growth, and the balance of yin and yang. The tidal rhythms, though not fully explained, fit into this worldview of harmony between heaven and earth. Observers along the coasts of the South China Sea would have noticed the moon's influence and interpreted it as a natural expression of cosmic balance. The Maori people of New Zealand and other Polynesian navigators developed intricate systems of knowledge about the moon and the sea. For them, the moon was not only a celestial guide across the ocean, but also a regulator of tides and fishing. They paid close attention to lunar phases, noting when the tides would be higher or lower and timing their activities accordingly. Though their explanations were framed in spiritual and cultural language, their observations were sharp, rooted in generations of lived experience with the water. In Northern Europe, Norse mythology saw the tides as the result of great cosmic struggles. One tale spoke of the giantess Ran, who ruled the sea with her net, catching sailors and dragging them beneath the waves. Another spoke of Jörmungandr, the world serpent, who encircled earth and stirred the seas when he moved. While the moon was not always directly mentioned, the sense that water was controlled by mighty beings fit neatly with the daily experience of tides shifting under forces that were beyond human control. In Japan, folklore also gave the moon a central place in the rhythms of life. The goddess Tsukuyomi was associated with the moon and order, her presence part of the cosmic balance maintained alongside her siblings Amaterasu, the sun, and Susanoo, the storm god. The ebb and flow of the seas were viewed as part of this divine framework. Japanese fishing communities paid close attention to the moon's phases, weaving its influence into practical knowledge as well as spiritual tradition. The indigenous peoples of the Americas also found meaning in the moon's sway. In coastal regions, such as among the tribes of the Pacific Northwest, oral traditions often tied the moon to water, fertility, and abundance. The sea itself was a living force, and the moon's cycle was a signal for when to fish, when to gather, and when to honour the balance of nature. While each tradition had its own stories, the underlying truth was the same. The moon and the waters were inseparable companions. It is remarkable how many cultures, separated by oceans and continents, converged on the same observation. The moon and the tides are linked. They may have described it with different gods, symbols, and myths, but the essence was universal. Standing at the edge of the sea, people saw the same phenomenon and gave it meaning in the frameworks they understood. Where modern science uses gravity, orbital mechanics, and resonance, ancient people used gods, spirits, and cosmic stories. Both approaches reveal the same awe for the world's rhythms. Even today, echoes of these ancient explanations remain. We speak of lunar influence, not only on tides but on moods, behaviour, and even sleep. The very word lunatic comes from the idea that the moon could affect human minds. While science has sifted fact from folklore, the sense of mystery has not fully vanished. The moon still seems like a quiet master of cycles, a pale overseer of the sea's endless breathing. Looking back, it is not difficult to understand why people framed tides in myth. Imagine standing on a beach with no knowledge of gravity. The sea stretches to the horizon, vast and immeasurable, and yet, every day it creeps forward and pulls away with perfect timing. Then you look up, and the moon has changed shape in the sky, from crescent to full to crescent again, and the tides shift in response. To see those patterns and not connect them would be more surprising than making the link. The explanation that gods commanded the waters, or that the moon whispered to the sea, was not only poetic but entirely reasonable for the knowledge of the time. The myths of tides tell us as much about human imagination as they do about the sea. They remind us that people have always sought meaning in patterns, that we have always tried to connect the heavens and the earth. While we now speak in the language of physics, the sense of wonder remains the same. The moon does command the waters. It does so with the invisible pull of gravity rather than the hand of a deity. But the poetry of the idea still lingers in every breaking wave. The moon does not just pull at the seas, it has long tugged at human imagination as well. Its phases offered one of the first reliable clocks in the sky, visible to everyone no matter where they lived. Before the invention of mechanical timepieces, before sundials and hourglasses, people could look up and see the bright disk waxing and waning, and they could plan their lives around its steady rhythm. The moon became not only a guide to the tides, but a guide to time itself. A lunar cycle, from one new moon to the next, lasts about 29.5 days. That period is close enough to the length of a month that the very word month comes from the word moon. Early societies noticed how this cycle repeated with comforting regularity and built calendars around it. Farmers knew when to sow and harvest, fishermen knew when the tides would swell, and navigators knew when to set sail, all by watching the shape of the moon. It was the original wall calendar, hung not in a kitchen, but in the sky above. For coastal communities, the link between the moon and the tides was practical knowledge long before it was scientific. Fishermen along the coast of India, Greece, or the Pacific Islands quickly recognized that the best times for fishing were tied to the lunar phases. Certain species of fish, crustaceans, and even corals spawn in sync with the moon. Their cycles intertwined with the tides that govern their habitats. Knowing when the moon would be full or new meant knowing when the ocean would be most generous. A bright moon could also light the sea at night, guiding boats safely through waters where daylight ended but the work continued. Agriculture too found a partner in lunar timekeeping. Farmers noticed that crops responded differently when planted at different phases of the moon. While some of these traditions may have had more folklore than science behind them, they shaped planting and harvesting rituals across the world. In many cultures, the moon's waxing phase was considered a time of growth and abundance, while the waning phase symbolized decline and rest. Even today, some gardeners still follow planting by the moon, a practice that traces back thousands of years to a time when the sky was humanity's most dependable guidebook. The moon's calendar was also essential for navigation. The Polynesian voyagers, among the greatest seafarers in history, relied on an extraordinary understanding of the heavens. They read the stars, the waves, and the moon. Its phases helped them mark time during long voyages, and its effect on the tides told them when to leave or arrive at particular islands. With no compasses or charts, They carried the moon as both clock and companion across vast stretches of ocean. Their ability to use the moon and the tides together allowed them to cross thousands of kilometres of open water, settling some of the most remote islands on Earth. In the ancient Near East, the Babylonians constructed one of the earliest known lunar calendars, carefully recording the moon's phases to regulate religious ceremonies, civic duties, and agricultural schedules. Their observations were meticulous, linking the cycles of the moon to eclipses, the tides, and even omens for kings and kingdoms. To them, the moon was not only a timekeeper but a cosmic messenger. The Hebrew calendar, still in use today for religious observances, is also lunar-based, showing the long continuity of this way of measuring time. China developed a lunisolar calendar that carefully balanced the moon's phases with the solar year. Festivals such as the Mid-Autumn Festival, celebrating the full harvest moon, are direct descendants of this system. In Islamic tradition, the calendar remains entirely lunar, with months beginning at the sighting of the new crescent moon. Ramadan, Eid, and other observances move through the seasons because the lunar year is shorter than the solar year. In each of these traditions, the moon is far more than a passive object in the sky. It dictates time, order, and the pace of life. The predictability of the lunar cycle also made it invaluable for organising communal life. Market days, festivals, and religious rituals were scheduled according to the moon. In societies where written records were rare, the sight of a full moon or a new crescent was a shared calendar visible to all. You did not need literacy or wealth to know when the next festival would be. You simply looked up. The moon unified entire communities under its glowing face, keeping time with impartial fairness. Even in Europe, where solar calendars eventually dominated, echoes of lunar timekeeping persisted. Easter, for instance, is calculated based on the first full moon after the spring equinox, an ancient blending of solar and lunar reckoning. Folklore continued to credit the moon with influence over health, weather and fortune, and people tracked its phases to guide their daily activities. The rhythm of waxing and waning remained embedded in human consciousness long after more precise calendars took over. The link between the moon and fertility also tied lunar calendars to the cycles of human life. The length of the lunar month is close to the average length of the menstrual cycle, and across cultures this parallel has not gone unnoticed. Ancient traditions often associated the moon with feminine energy, cycles of birth and renewal, and the rhythms of nature. The moon was seen as a cosmic mirror of life itself, reflecting change, constancy, and return. It is easy to forget in a world of digital clocks and global positioning satellites just how central the moon once was to human survival. Its phases told farmers when to work the land, guided fishermen to abundant catches, and gave sailors the courage to cross open seas. Its light brightened the darkness, its pull commanded the tides, and its cycles marked the passing of months. Where the sun provided the rhythm of days and seasons, the moon provided the finer notes, the subtler cadence that kept life in tune with the sea and sky. There is something comforting about the simplicity of it. A person in ancient Egypt, a navigator in Polynesia, and a farmer in Mesopotamia could all look at the same moon and know where they stood in time. No matter the distance between them, they shared the same cosmic calendar. Even today, when the moon rises full and bright, it pulls at some deep memory within us, a reminder that time was once kept by looking up, not looking down at a watch. The lunar calendar of life shows us how profoundly the moon has shaped human history. It was not just a clock, but a companion, a silent teacher reminding us to observe, to adapt, and to align ourselves with the rhythms of the natural world. It still shines above us, waxing and waning as it always has, keeping time for those who care to notice, and reminding us that in every tide, in every field, and in every voyage, the moon has always been there, guiding quietly from the night sky. The strip of coastline that lies between the high tide and the low tide marks one of the most extraordinary habitats on Earth. This is the intertidal zone, a place where land and sea continuously trade territory. Twice a day the waters surge forward to cover it, and twice a day they retreat, leaving pools, rocks and sand exposed to the air. For many creatures, this daily cycle would be a nightmare of constant upheaval. But for the organisms that live here, it is simply home. The intertidal world is a realm of survivors, shaped by rhythms as old as the moon itself. At first glance, a tide pool might look like a quiet puddle left behind by the sea. Peer a little closer, however, and you will find an entire universe tucked into the rocky hollows. Tiny crabs scuttle among pebbles, starfish cling firmly to the stones, and anemones sway their tentacles like flowers in an invisible breeze. The pool is a temporary refuge, sealed off when the tide retreats and flooded again when the water returns. Each creature within it has evolved strategies to cope with sudden changes in temperature, salinity and oxygen. Survival here requires resilience, flexibility, and sometimes a pinch of stubbornness. Take barnacles, for example. These small, unassuming crustaceans glue themselves to rocks, ships and piers, living in a shell that can slam shut when exposed to air. When the tide rises, they open to filter food from the water, extending feathery appendages that look like tiny nets. When the tide falls, they close tightly to prevent drying out, waiting patiently for the sea's return. Their entire existence is a balance between endurance and opportunity, dictated by the clockwork schedule of the moon. Mussels too crowd the rocks in dense beds, attaching themselves with strong thread-like anchors. Together they form living fortresses, with thousands packed side by side. The tight grouping helps them retain moisture when exposed to the air, and provides collective resistance against crashing waves. It also turns them into bustling cities of the intertidal world, offering shelter for smaller organisms like snails, worms, and juvenile crabs. The mussel's way of life demonstrates how cooperation, even unintentionally, can create resilience in an environment that is anything but gentle. The predators of the tide pools have their own set of tricks. Sea stars, for example, use hundreds of tube feet with suction tips to creep slowly over rocks in search of prey. Their favourite meal is often mussels, which they pry open with patient persistence. Once a gap appears, they avert their stomachs, literally pushing them outside their bodies into the shell to digest the unlucky mussel where it sits. It is a slow but effective method, a reminder that the intertidal world rewards determination as much as speed. Then there are sea anemones, which resemble flowers but are in truth formidable hunters. Their delicate-looking tentacles are armed with stinging cells, ready to paralyze small fish or drifting plankton. When submerged, they open fully, creating miniature gardens beneath the waves. When exposed to the air, they close tightly, forming small, wet blobs that conserve moisture until the tide returns. Beauty here is deceptive, for even the most elegant creatures are locked in a constant struggle for survival. This habitat is not only about individuals adapting to the daily changes, it is also about the broader ecological balance created by the tide's rhythm. When the water retreats, birds swoop down to feed on exposed creatures, while terrestrial predators like raccoons may scavenge along the rocks. When the tide returns, fish swim in to hunt among the pools. The intertidal zone is a meeting place of worlds, where land and sea, air and water, predator and prey overlap. Each visit of the tide resets the stage, creating a cycle of abundance and vulnerability. The challenges here are intense. Temperatures can swing dramatically in just a few hours, from the cooling effect of seawater to the heat of the midday sun. Pools may become salty as water evaporates or diluted with fresh rain. Oxygen can run low when the water is still, forcing creatures to adapt with behaviours like surfacing for air or slowing their metabolism. Yet despite these hardships, the intertidal zone is teeming with life, proof that resilience often flourishes where conditions are toughest. What makes this environment even more remarkable is its deep connection to the history of life itself. Many scientists believe that the earlier steps of life onto land may have taken place in tidal areas. The alternating floods and retreats of the ocean could have encouraged early organisms to survive both in water and in air. In shallow pools, organic molecules concentrated, mixed and reacted, perhaps giving rise to the first stirrings of life. Later, as evolution advanced, tidal flats provided the testing grounds where aquatic creatures slowly adapted to the challenges of terrestrial living. In this way, the moon's pull may have guided not just the seas but the very trajectory of life on Earth. Even today, the intertidal zone acts as a bridge between worlds. It is where algae photosynthesize during low tide and then provide food when submerged. It is where crabs scuttle between air and water, equally at home in both. It is where tiny fish, like blennies, hop across wet rocks, demonstrating the blurred line between sea and shore. Each species here carries the story of adaptation written into its body, each one a living testament to the power of cycles. For humans, tide pools and mudflats have always held fascination. Coastal peoples gathered shellfish and seaweed, learned to predict when the best harvests would occur, and built their own rhythms around the sea's breathing. Even now, walking along a rocky shore, one can feel the timelessness of the intertidal zone. Children poke into pools, delighted by crabs and starfish, just as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. Scientists peer into the same pools, discovering intricate relationships that hint at evolution's grand experiments. What might seem chaotic, the water rushing in, rushing out, creatures opening and closing, hunting and hiding, is in fact a highly ordered system shaped by the moon's pull. The intertidal world is a lesson in patience and adaptation, in finding opportunity within constant change. It demonstrates that survival is not about resisting cycles, but about embracing them, flowing with the tides rather than against them. The next time one looks at the stretch of rocks exposed at low tide, it is worth remembering that this zone is not just a marginal strip of coastline. It is a crucible of life, a place where the rules of land and sea overlap, where organisms thrive in extremes, and where the fingerprints of our planet's history are still visible in every barnacle, mussel, and starfish. The intertidal world is, in many ways, the living memory of the tides, shaped daily by the moon's embrace and carrying forward the story of resilience that began billions of years ago. From the moment humans first settled near the coast, the tide became more than just a natural curiosity. It was a partner, sometimes helpful, sometimes frustrating, and always present. Civilizations rose and fell alongside the water's edge, learning to predict when the sea would open its harbours, when it would hide its shores, and when it would grant or deny passage. The moon, though rarely named directly in the pages of history, was there all along, pulling quietly on the oceans and shaping human destiny in ways both subtle and profound. Harbours were the first stage on which this partnership played out. To build a functioning port in the ancient world meant understanding how tides would affect access. A bay that looked inviting at high tide could leave ships stranded on mud at low tide, while another that seemed shallow might reveal itself to be safe and accessible all day long. The great harbours of the ancient Mediterranean, like those at Carthage or Athens, were blessed in part because their tides were modest, making them predictable and easy to use. By contrast, northern Europe, with its higher tidal ranges, required more careful timing. Ports like London, situated far up the Thames, could only be reached or left at certain times. Knowledge of the tide became a kind of secret key, one that determined whether trade could flourish or falter. Trade itself was shaped by this rhythm. In the Roman Empire, grain ships carrying food from Egypt and North Africa supplied the hungry city of Rome. Timing their departures and arrivals depended not only on favourable winds but also on favourable tides. Medieval merchants in northern Europe relied on the Hanseatic League's networks of ports, where predicting the tide meant predicting profit. Goods could not be loaded or unloaded without it. To the merchants, the moon cycles were not a matter of astronomy but of commerce, written in their ledgers as clearly as weights and measures. War, too, has often been decided by the tide. One of the most famous examples comes from the Norman conquest of England in the year 1066. William the Conqueror timed his fleet's crossing of the English Channel with the tides, ensuring that his ships could land safely on the shores of Sussex. Centuries later, in 1776, George Washington's daring crossing of the Delaware River relied on not only weather and stealth, but also on an intimate knowledge of how the tides and currents would carry his boats. History often remembers the commanders and the soldiers, but rarely the moon overhead, orchestrating the flow of the water beneath them. Perhaps the most dramatic demonstration of tides in warfare came during the Second World War. On June 6, 1944, the Allied forces launched the D-Day invasion of Normandy. The choice of date and time was no accident. Military planners carefully selected a moment when the tide would be low enough to expose German obstacles on the beaches, yet rising soon after to float the landing craft closer to shore. Moonlight was also needed to guide paratroopers during the night. The entire operation hinged on a precise understanding of lunar cycles. Without the tide, one of the most significant turning points in modern history might never have succeeded. Beyond war and trade, the tide influenced daily life in quieter but no less important ways. Fishermen throughout the ages planned their work around tidal rhythms. In Japan, Oama divers timed their hunts for Babylonian seaweed with the moon, while in northern Europe communities gathered shellfish on mudflats exposed at low tide. Even leisure was tied to the sea's pulse. Beachgoers in Victorian England flocked to the shore not just for fresh air, but to witness the drama of the water advancing and retreating, a spectacle that spoke to the rhythm of nature. For navigators, especially those venturing into unfamiliar waters, the tide was both guide and hazard. The Polynesians, masters of long-distance voyaging, combined their knowledge of stars, waves, and the moon to read the ocean. Their canoes carried them across thousands of kilometres of Pacific water, and their understanding of how the tide filled or emptied lagoons made the difference between safe landfall and disaster. In Europe, sailors charted tidal patterns to enter shallow estuaries, while medieval pilots along the English Channel memorised the timing of local currents to steer through treacherous passages. Navigation was as much about reading the moon's influence as it was about reading the stars. The moon's sway over civilization also left marks in language and law. In some coastal communities, tidal rights determined who could gather shellfish or harvest seaweed, often tied to specific phases of the moon. Market days and festivals aligned with spring tides, when the sea revealed wide stretches of shore. Even in literature, the tide became a symbol of opportunity or inevitability. Shakespeare wrote of a tide in the affairs of men that, if taken at the flood, led to fortune. The metaphor is as clear as it is timeless. To succeed, one must know when the water is turning. Consider also how tides shaped architecture. Coastal towns built quays, docks, and even entire streets designed to withstand flooding twice a day. In Mont-Saint-Michel in France, the sea rushes in with astonishing speed during high tide, cutting the abbey off from the mainland. The spectacle was both a natural wonder and a reminder that the moon's authority extended even into stone and mortar. Similarly, Venice was shaped not just by its canals, but by its struggle with tides, a challenge it continues to face today. The role of the moon in these stories is rarely mentioned outright. History books speak of kings, generals, merchants, and builders, but seldom of the silent partner in the sky who set the rhythm. Yet without the moon's pull, harbours would have functioned differently, battles might have been lost, and trade might have followed other routes. The moon has been, in every sense, an unspoken ally, and sometimes an unacknowledged adversary, shaping the fortunes of civilizations from the shadows. What is striking is the universality of it. Across cultures and centuries, from Viking raiders timing their coastal strikes to Chinese merchants sailing the South China Sea, from medieval pilgrims wading across tidal causeways to modern engineers designing tidal power plants, the knowledge of the tide has remained vital. The moon's pull has shaped not only the natural world, but also the human story, influencing choices great and small. To look back at this history is to realise that the tides are not just background scenery. They are a force of history itself, a hidden current running beneath the events we celebrate and remember. Harbours, trade routes, conquests and revolutions have all been guided in part by the quiet hand of the moon. While it may never appear in the chronicles as a named participant, the moon has always been there, keeping time, pulling water, and reminding humanity that it does not move alone. Civilizations may rise and fall, but the moon remains above them, steady and impartial. Its partnership with Earth has been written into our harbours, our calendars, our victories, and even our failures. To see the tide today is to see the same rhythm that guided the first merchants, the first sailors, and the first soldiers who looked out at the water and made their plans. The moon, patient and constant, continues to be the silent strategist, the unseen merchant, and the eternal harbour master of human history. For as long as people have watched the sea rise and fall, there has been a need to predict its rhythm. Knowing when the water would come in and when it would recede meant survival, trade, and safety. Long before modern instruments, coastal communities developed methods to observe and anticipate the tides, and over time these observations grew into one of the most reliable sciences of prediction. From marks on stone walls to the watchful eyes of satellites, the story of measuring tides is as much about human ingenuity as it is about the moon's pull. In the ancient world, the earliest tide measurements were often little more than careful memory. Fishermen knew that certain rocks would be covered at high water and exposed at low water, and they passed that knowledge along through generations. In Egypt, priests noticed that the flooding of the Nile was linked to lunar cycles, and although this was more seasonal than tidal, the connection between water levels and celestial bodies was firmly established. The Greeks and Romans also paid attention. In the 1st century BCE, the Roman author and naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote about how the tides seemed to follow the moon's movements and how they were strongest during the full and new phases. His observations were not precise, but they revealed that people were already watching the sea with scientific curiosity. One of the earliest known tools for tracking tides was the tide mill, used in Europe as early as the Middle Ages. These were water mills powered by the rise and fall of the tide, with basins that trapped water at high tide and released it to turn a wheel as the tide fell. To build and operate one required a decent understanding of local tidal patterns, which in turn demanded consistent observations. The millers may not have had modern charts, but they knew the rhythm of their harbours intimately. By the 17th century, scientific approaches to tides were advancing quickly. Galileo, who spent much of his career gazing at the moon, also tried to explain tides. He mistakenly attributed them to the sloshing of water caused by Earth's motion around the sun, rather than the pull of the moon itself. His explanation was wrong, but it showed how seriously scientists were grappling with the problem. A few decades later, Johannes Kepler correctly suggested that the moon's gravity was responsible, and Isaac Newton eventually provided the mathematical framework to explain it fully in the late 17th century. With gravity understood, measuring tides became less about speculation and more about precision. By the 18th century, systematic records were being kept. Tide gauges began to appear in harbours across Europe. These early instruments were simple but effective. Vertical measuring rods fixed to piers or sea walls, marked with units to show the changing water level. Observers recorded these changes daily, building up data that revealed local tidal ranges and times. Over the years, this knowledge was compiled into tide tables, printed schedules that listed when and how high the tides would be. For sailors, fishermen and merchants, tide tables became as essential as maps and compasses. In Britain, the need for accurate tide prediction was especially great during the expansion of the Royal Navy. By the 19th century, scientists like William Whewell and George Biddle Airy developed more sophisticated methods, treating tides as the sum of many overlapping waves, each caused by different gravitational influences. This approach allowed for greater accuracy and paved the way for mechanized tide predicting machines. These machines were remarkable feats of engineering. Built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, They use pulleys, gears, and levers to calculate the rise and fall of tides at specific locations. The most famous, Lord Kelvin's tide predicting machine, could process dozens of tidal components at once, producing tables that saved mariners from guesswork. Watching one in action was like seeing gravity itself translated into the steady turning of wheels. Long before computers, these devices were analog supercomputers dedicated to the moon's rhythm. As technology advanced, so did the precision of measurements. By the 20th century, floating tide gauges attached to piers and connected to recording devices produced continuous graphs of water levels. These charts gave not just high and low tides, but also the subtle shifts caused by weather, pressure, and storm surges. Scientists could now separate the predictable lunar influence from the unpredictable chaos of the atmosphere. In this way, tide measurement became not only a tool for navigation, but also a vital part of understanding coastal hazards. The modern era has taken measurement to the skies. Satellites equipped with radar altimeters orbit Earth, bouncing signals off the ocean's surface and measuring the return time with incredible accuracy. These instruments can detect changes of just a few centimeters across vast stretches of sea. Combined with global positioning systems and advanced models, scientists now map tides not only at the coast but also across the open ocean. The patterns revealed are breathtaking. Spirals and whirls known as amphidromic systems, where tides rotate around central points. These images show the tides as a planetary scale phenomenon, shaped by continents, seafloor ridges, and the moon's pull, all captured in vibrant detail. With these tools, prediction has reached extraordinary levels of reliability. Tide tables today can be generated decades in advance, with remarkable accuracy, incorporating hundreds of tidal components. Computers process astronomical data, accounting for the positions of the moon, the sun, and even the slow drift of the lunar orbit. Local conditions are folded in, creating forecasts tailored to specific harbours and coastlines. What once required the watchful eyes of generations can now be calculated in moments, though the principle is the same. The moon pulls and the sea responds. Yet for all this sophistication, the essence of tidal observation remains grounded in human experience. Coastal communities still read the sea daily, often with a skill passed down through families. A fisherman may know by instinct when the tide will turn, not because of a satellite map, but because of the way water curls around a rock, or the sound of waves against a pier. Technology has refined and expanded our knowledge, but the partnership between humans and tides is still lived at the shore, where the water rises and falls as it always has. There is something satisfying in seeing how the story has unfolded, from scratches on stone walls and guesses tied to lunar phases, to the intricate gears of Victorian prediction machines, and now to satellites mapping the sea from space. The quest to measure tides has mirrored the broader journey of science itself. It is a journey from myth to observation, from observation to mathematics, and from mathematics to models that encompass the entire planet. And yet, despite all the complexity, the heart of it remains simple. The tides move to the pull of the moon, joined by the sun, shaped by the earth, and measured by human curiosity. The science of tides is not just about water levels on a chart. It is about our enduring need to understand the rhythms of the world. Every tide table, every gauge, every satellite pass is another chapter in a dialogue that began when the first people noticed the sea creeping forward and falling back again. The moon pulls, the water answers, and humanity listens, still scribbling notes in the margin of that timeless story. Every day, without fail, the oceans rise and fall under the pull of the moon. It is a movement so steady, so predictable, that for centuries people have wondered whether it could be tapped as a source of power. The idea seems almost too perfect. An endless cycle, driven by gravity, with no fuel to burn and no smoke to cloud the air. While wind and solar depend on weather and daylight, the tides march to the moon's timetable, as regular as breathing. Harnessing that quiet force has long been a dream of engineers and visionaries. and in some places it has become a reality. Yet the path from dream to dependable energy has been anything but straightforward. One of the earliest and most direct methods of tidal energy capture is the barrage. Imagine a dam built across the mouth of a bay or estuary, fitted with sluice gates and turbines. As the tide rises, water flows into the enclosed basin. When the tide begins to fall, the gates are opened, and the water rushes back out, turning turbines that generate electricity. The principle is simple: trap water when it is high, and release it when it is low, extracting energy from the difference in height. The most famous example of this approach is the Reims tidal power station in France, which began operation in 1966. Stretching across the Reims estuary in Brittany, it was the first large-scale tidal power plant in the world, and it remains one of the largest to this day. Its turbines can generate hundreds of megawatts of power, enough to supply a significant portion of the region's electricity. The station has stood for decades as proof that the moon's pull can be converted into light in people's homes. Yet barrages are not without their drawbacks. Building a dam across an estuary alters the natural flow of water, which can disrupt ecosystems and affect marine life. Fish migration routes may be blocked, sediment patterns may change, and local habitats may be reshaped. While the energy produced is clean in terms of carbon emissions, it comes at an environmental cost that must be weighed carefully. The balance between renewable power and ecological impact is one of the great challenges of tidal energy. To address some of these concerns, engineers have explored tidal lagoons as an alternative. Rather than damming an entire estuary, a lagoon involves constructing a ring-shaped barrier in shallow coastal waters. Water flows in and out of the lagoon with the tides, passing through turbines placed in the walls. This design can generate power without blocking a whole river mouth, and lagoons can be placed where environmental disruption is less severe. Proposals for tidal lagoons in places like Swansea Bay in Wales have attracted attention for their potential to provide predictable, renewable energy, while also doubling as protective seawalls. Though projects have faced funding hurdles, the concept remains a promising way of harnessing the tide's rhythm. Beyond barrages and lagoons, there are also tidal stream systems, which work much like underwater wind turbines. Instead of relying on the difference in water height, these machines capture the kinetic energy of tidal currents as they flow past. Turbines anchored to the seafloor spin as the tide moves in and out, generating electricity directly from the moving water. Because tidal currents can be extremely strong in narrow channels, even a relatively small turbine can produce a surprising amount of power. Scotland has become a leader in this field, with test sites in the Pentland Firth and around the Orkney Islands. The strong tidal flows in these waters provide an ideal laboratory for the technology. One array of underwater turbines has already demonstrated the ability to supply electricity to local communities, showing that tidal streams could one day become a mainstream part of renewable energy networks. The advantage of these systems is that they do not require massive dams or lagoons, and they can be installed in places where currents are naturally concentrated. The challenge, however, is building machines that can withstand the harsh environment of the sea, where salt water corrodes metal, storms batter structures, and maintenance is costly. The appeal of tidal power lies in its predictability. Unlike solar power, which vanishes at night or under clouds, and unlike wind, which can vary unpredictably, the tides can be forecast years, even centuries, in advance. This reliability makes them an attractive complement to other renewable sources, offering a steady baseline of energy production. A power grid that blends wind, solar, and tidal could balance the variability of weather with the constancy of the moon. Despite these advantages, tidal power remains a relatively small player in the global energy landscape. The reason is largely cost. Building barrages, lagoons, or subsea turbines is expensive, and the technology is still developing. While the fuel itself is free and eternal, the moon will not stop pulling anytime soon. The infrastructure required to capture that energy comes with high upfront investment. Governments and companies must weigh whether the benefits outweigh the costs compared to other renewable technologies that are now cheaper and easier to deploy. Environmental concerns also loom large. Estuaries and coastal waters are some of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, home to countless species of fish, birds, and plants. Altering tidal flows can have ripple effects throughout these systems. Engineers are working to design more fish-friendly turbines, smarter barriers, and systems that minimize disruption, but the trade-offs remain complex. The challenge is to find ways of drawing energy from the moon's pull without silencing the natural symphony of the coastal world. Still, the dream persists. The tides offer something rare, a renewable resource that is not only clean but utterly dependable. They do not depend on luck, weather, or fuel, but on the same gravitational embrace that has guided Earth for billions of years. Each day the tides deliver gigatons of moving water, a power source that dwarfs human demand if only it could be captured efficiently. Standing on a coast where the tide surges in, one can almost hear the hum of potential energy waiting to be tapped. Tidal power is, in many ways, humanity's attempt to formalize its partnership with the moon. For millennia, the moon has shaped fishing, farming, and navigation. Now it might also illuminate our cities. It is humbling to think that a light bulb glowing in someone's home could trace its energy back to the slow, steady tug of the moon on the sea. That connection between cosmos and comfort is as poetic as it is practical. The future of tidal energy will likely be a mixture of approaches: barrages where geography allows, lagoons in shallower waters, and arrays of tidal stream turbines in swift channels. Each carries its own promises and problems, but together they hint at a renewable future where the moon itself helps power our world. If humans can solve the technical and environmental challenges, the tides could become not just a symbol of rhythm and change, but also a foundation of stability in the search for sustainable energy. In the end, the story of tidal power is one of ambition and patience. The moon continues to pull, as it always has, and the oceans continue to respond. Humanity is learning to join that rhythm, to place turbines and walls in the path of water, and to catch a fragment of its energy. It may take decades for tidal power to reach its full potential, but the principle is sound, and the source is eternal. As long as the moon shines above, the tide will rise and fall, carrying with it the promise of energy drawn from the oldest partnership on Earth. Most tides come and go with a kind of quiet dignity. The water rises, the water falls, and if you're not paying attention, you might miss the entire performance. Yet in certain corners of the world, the tide refuses to be so polite. Instead, it surges with astonishing speed, races upriver as a wall of water, or twists itself into strange whirlpools. These extreme tides and odd phenomena remind us that while the moon's pull is steady, the way the oceans respond is anything but predictable. One of the most dramatic displays of tidal force is the tidal bore. Imagine standing on the bank of a river and watching as, rather than simply rising gradually, the incoming tide forms a rolling wave that races upstream against the current. In some places, this wave can be several meters high, moving with a roar that can be heard from far away. A tidal bore occurs when the incoming tide is funneled into a narrowing river or estuary, compressing the water into a single surge. It is as though the sea has decided not to wait politely at the mouth of the river, but to charge in like an uninvited guest. The Qiantang River in China hosts the most famous example. Known as the Silver Dragon, its tidal bore can reach heights of over 9 meters during the autumn equinox, racing upstream at speeds that rival a galloping horse. For centuries, crowds have gathered on the riverbanks to watch the spectacle, cheering as the wave thunders past. In modern times, thrill-seeking surfers have even attempted to ride the bore, carried inland by a force born of nothing more than the moon's pull meeting the shape of the river. Other tidal bores can be found across the world. The Severn bore in England winds its way up the River Severn several times a year, attracting surfers and kayakers who try to stay upright on the rolling wall of water. In the Amazon basin, the Pororoca roars up tributaries with terrifying strength, sweeping away trees and reshaping banks. The sheer power of these events shows that the tide is not just a gentle rise and fall, but, under the right conditions, a force that can rearrange entire landscapes. Whirlpools are another reminder of the tide's strange moods. Perhaps the most famous is the Saltstraumen in Norway, a maelstrom formed when massive volumes of tidal water are forced through a narrow strait. The resulting currents can create whirlpools several meters wide, powerful enough to challenge boats and fascinate onlookers. Legends have grown around such phenomena, with ancient sailors often blaming sea monsters for the churning waters. In reality, the monsters were mathematical. The combination of narrow passages, uneven seafloor, and tidal surges created eddies that spun with relentless energy. In Japan, the Naruto whirlpools form in the strait between Naruto and Awaji Island, where tides rush through at speeds of over 20 kilometers per hour. Though not dangerous to large ships, they are dramatic enough to have inspired centuries of art and poetry. Once again, the moon plays its invisible role, pulling at the seas and creating beauty where geography adds a twist. Not all odd tides involve chaos and spectacle. Sometimes the strangeness lies in their absence. The Mediterranean Sea, for example, has tides so small that they are barely noticeable. In most places, the difference between high and low water is measured in mere centimetres. The near-enclosed nature of the basin prevents the tidal bulges from expressing themselves fully, leaving the Mediterranean with waters that seem almost immune to the moon's pull. Similarly, the Baltic Sea experiences minimal tides, reminding us that geography can sometimes blunt even the might of celestial gravity. Other regions flip expectations in different ways. In parts of the Gulf of Mexico, for instance, only one high tide and one low tide occur each day, rather than the more common two. These diurnal tides result from the peculiar geometry of the ocean basin and the way tidal waves resonate within it. To locals, it is simply the way of things, but to scientists, it is a fascinating example of how the universal rules of gravity translate into diverse local expressions. Then there is the curious matter of the term tidal wave. For much of history, people use this phrase to describe any large wave, whether caused by tides, storms, or earthquakes. Even today, headlines sometimes mistakenly label tsunamis as tidal waves. The truth is that tsunamis are not caused by the moon at all, but by seismic activity beneath the sea. Earthquakes, landslides, or volcanic eruptions can displace enormous volumes of water, sending waves racing across the ocean at jetliner speeds. Though they may resemble tides in their vast reach, they have nothing to do with lunar pull. The name tidal wave is a relic of older times, one that science has tried to correct, though popular speech is slower to follow. Despite the confusion, the difference is important. Tides are predictable, gentle in their inevitability, and governed by celestial mechanics. Tsunamis are sudden, violent, and born of the restless earth itself. To conflate the two is to miss the distinction between the steady rhythm of the moon and the unpredictable convulsions of the planet. Still, the persistence of the phrase tidal wave shows how deeply tides have lodged in human imagination as the most visible movers of the sea. Some extreme tides, while less destructive, still carry an air of drama. In parts of Alaska and Canada, the tidal range can reach over 15 meters, exposing vast expanses of mud-flattened rock at low tide, before submerging them entirely at high tide. Walking on such flats requires caution, for the water can return faster than expected, racing in like a living wall. Locals speak of the tide coming in as fast as a horse can run, and while that may be a touch of exaggeration, it is not far from the truth. To watch an empty bay fill in a matter of hours is to see the moon's pull made visible on a breathtaking scale. Extreme tides have shaped not only landscapes but also human culture. In some regions, festivals celebrate the arrival of tidal bores, and folklore warns of whirlpools inhabited by spirits or monsters. These stories, while not scientifically accurate, capture the awe and respect inspired by such phenomena. For communities who lived alongside them, the strange behaviour of the water was both a source of livelihood and a reminder of nature's power. The oddities of the tide serve as a reminder that the moon's pull does not operate on a blank canvas. The ocean floor, the contours of coasts, and the shapes of rivers all conspire to turn a simple, gravitational force into a kaleidoscope of effects. Sometimes the result is a gentle lapping of waves on the shore. Other times, it is a dragon of water racing up a river, a whirlpool spinning like a giant stirring spoon, or a bay emptying and filling with astonishing speed. To study these extremes is to appreciate both the universality and the variety of the tide. The same moon that causes a barely noticeable ripple in one sea can unleash a roaring wall of water in another. Geography gives the final say, but gravity provides the opening note. And in that interplay, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, turning the tide into one of Earth's most captivating natural performances. The moon feels like such a steady presence that it is hard to imagine it ever changing. Night after night, it rises above the horizon, pulling at the oceans, keeping time with its phases, and casting its pale light across the earth. Yet the truth is that the moon is not locked in place. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it is drifting away from us. Each year it edges farther out into space, taking with it a fragment of the tide's strength. Over millions and billions of years, this quiet retreat will reshape the relationship between Earth, its oceans, and the faithful companion that has circled it for over 4 billion years. The pace of this drift is tiny on human scales, just under 4 centimetres every year. That is about the speed your fingernails grow. At first glance, this hardly seems worth worrying about. Yet multiplied across geological time, those centimetres add up to staggering distances. 100 million years from now, the moon will be thousands of kilometres farther away. 1 billion years from now, it will be tens of thousands of kilometres farther. The slow retreat is one of the most patient changes in nature, a reminder that even what feels eternal is always shifting. Why is the moon leaving us? The culprit is none other than the tides themselves. As the moon pulls on Earth's oceans, the friction of water moving against land dissipates energy. That energy does not vanish. It is transferred. Some of it slows Earth's rotation, making our days ever so slightly longer. The rest is passed to the moon, giving it a gentle push outward in its orbit. The moon in effect is stealing rotational energy from the Earth, trading shorter days for greater distance. It is a cosmic exchange, with the tides as the middlemen. This means that long ago the moon was closer, and the tides were far stronger. In the days of the early Earth, perhaps 3 to 4 billion years ago, the moon hovered much nearer in the sky, appearing many times larger than it does today. Back then, days on Earth may have lasted only 6 to 10 hours, and the tides would have been colossal, reshaping coastlines with relentless energy. Those immense tidal forces may even have played a role in stirring the chemical soup from which life emerged, mixing the oceans with a vigour we can scarcely imagine. As the moon continues its retreat, the opposite will happen. The farther it drifts, the weaker its pull will become. Tidal ranges will shrink, growing gentler with each passing epoch. In a few 100 million years, the tides may be noticeably smaller though still present. 1 billion years from now, they may be shadows of what we know today, the grand tidal spectacles of places like the Bay of Fundy reduced to modest ripples. The moon will still command the seas, but its authority will be softer, its once powerful grip slackening with distance. The lengthening of Earth's day is another consequence of this process. Right now, each day lasts about 24 hours, but ancient rocks preserve evidence that hundreds of millions of years ago, days were shorter. Coral fossils, for instance, record daily growth rings that allow scientists to count how many days fit into a year. Around 400 million years ago, there were about 400 days in a year, meaning each day was only about 21.5 hours long. The moon has been slowly stretching our days ever since. Far into the future, the Earth may rotate so slowly that a single day lasts more than a month by today's measure. Eventually this process will reach a point of tidal locking, where Earth always shows the same face to the Moon, just as the Moon already shows the same face to Earth. In that distant age, one side of Earth will permanently face its companion, while the other side will never see it. The tides then will be almost unrecognisable compared to today, shaped by a static relationship rather than the constant change we know. This outcome is billions of years away, and long before it arrives, the Sun itself will have evolved into a red giant, transforming the solar system beyond recognition. Still, the thought of Earth and Moon locked forever together in a final embrace is strangely poetic. The shrinking of tides over time may also affect life. Ecosystems that rely on the intertidal zone could diminish as the range between high and low water narrows. The mixing of coastal waters, which distributes nutrients and supports rich biodiversity, would become less vigorous. In the grand sweep of evolution, this could alter the course of species and ecosystems in ways we cannot predict. The Moon's retreat is slow enough that life will have time to adapt, but the changes will ripple through the natural world just as surely as the tides themselves ripple across today's beaches. It is humbling to think that the familiar cycle we witness each day is not a permanent feature, but part of a much larger story. We happen to live in an era when the Moon is at just the right distance to create the tides we know, and even to make solar eclipses possible where the Moon perfectly covers the Sun's disk. In the distant future, those eclipses will disappear as the Moon grows too small in the sky to block the Sun. The tides will fade and the cosmic partnership that has shaped so much of Earth's history will enter a quieter phase. Yet even as the Moon drifts away, it leaves a record written in stone. Tidal patterns preserved in ancient rocks tell the story of shorter days and stronger tides long ago. Fossil corals and shellfish preserve daily and seasonal rhythms that reflect the changing relationship between Earth and Moon. Geology holds a diary of the tides, each page another reminder that our present world is just one chapter in a very long book. And while the Moon's retreat may seem melancholy, a slow farewell from a beloved companion, it also speaks to the beauty of change. Nothing in the universe is truly fixed. Orbits evolve, stars age, planets turn, and even the most familiar sights shift over deep time. The Moon's long goodbye is part of that endless transformation, a cosmic reminder that stability is always temporary, and that impermanence is the rule, not the exception. For now, the Moon is still close enough to stir the seas with vigour. Its pull still sculpts beaches, shapes ecosystems, and guides human activity. Its light still shines across the water, and its presence still anchors us in a rhythm older than humanity itself. But in the quiet background, it is drifting away, centimetre by centimetre, changing the future of tides in ways we can only imagine. To stand at the shore and watch the tide come in is therefore to witness more than a daily cycle. It is to glimpse a moment in an immense story, a chapter where the Moon still holds Earth tightly, even as it slowly lets go. Millions of years from now, the waves will not climb as high, and billions of years from now they may barely respond at all. But the memory of the partnership will remain, written in stone, in fossils, and in the rhythms of life that the Moon helped to shape. The long goodbye is already underway, a farewell so slow and so gentle that it feels eternal, yet one day it will be complete. When we think of tides, it is natural to picture the familiar rise and fall of Earth's oceans under the pull of the Moon. But tides are not confined to our world. They are a universal consequence of gravity, a kind of cosmic stretching that can shape planets, moons, and even stars. Across the solar system and beyond, tides stir hidden oceans, fuel volcanic fury, and even determine whether a distant exoplanet can host life. The Moon's pull on Earth is only the beginning of a much larger story. Perhaps the most spectacular example lies on Jupiter's moon, Io. At first glance, Io looks like a bruised orange sprinkled with black scars, Those scars are active volcanoes, hundreds of them, erupting lava fountains taller than Mount Everest. Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system, and its violent surface is not powered by the sun but by tides. As Io orbits Jupiter, it is pulled and squeezed by the planet's immense gravity. The orbit is not perfectly circular, so the tug changes slightly with every pass, flexing Io like a stress ball. That flexing generates friction and heat inside the moon, melting its interior and feeding the constant eruptions. On Earth, tides move water. On Io, tides move molten rock. Just next door, another moon of Jupiter tells a quieter but equally fascinating story. Europa, with its smooth, icy shell, hides a global ocean beneath its surface. The heat that keeps this ocean liquid is also produced by tidal forces. As Europa orbits, Jupiter's gravity bends and relaxes the ice, creating friction that warms the interior. Without this tidal heating, Europa's ocean would have frozen solid long ago. Instead, it remains liquid, perhaps tens of kilometers beneath the ice, and may even host the conditions for life. Plumes of water vapour have been detected jetting from cracks in the surface, hinting at a vast sea kept alive by the steady pull of Jupiter's tides. Saturn, too, offers tidal wonders. Enceladus, a small icy moon, is famous for the geysers that spray water and ice into space from its south pole. Beneath its frozen crust lies another subsurface ocean, warmed by tidal heating from Saturn's pull. The constant flexing keeps water liquid, and the geysers provide clues about the ocean's chemistry. Scientists have found evidence of organic molecules in the plumes, raising tantalizing possibilities about habitability. Without tides, Enceladus would be a frozen rock. With them, it is a world of hidden potential. Then there is Titan, Saturn's largest moon. Unlike Enceladus, Titan has lakes and seas on its surface, but they are filled not with water, but with liquid methane and ethane. Even here, tides play a role. Saturn's pull causes subtle shifts in Titan's lakes, tiny tides of hydrocarbons sloshing back and forth. Beneath the surface, there may also be a hidden water ocean, once again kept warm by tidal energy. Saturn's moons together show how tides can create diversity. Fire on Io, water on Europa, geysers on Enceladus, and methane seas on Titan, all born from the same gravitational principle. The effects are not limited to moons. Even entire planets feel tidal forces. Earth itself experiences a slow lengthening of its day as the moon pulls at its rotation, but the effect is modest compared to worlds locked into more extreme tidal relationships. Many exoplanets orbiting close to their stars are tidally locked, meaning the same side always faces the star while the other side remains in perpetual darkness. This is the same situation we see with our moon, which always shows one face to Earth. For these exoplanets, tides dictate the rhythm of time, fixing a permanent day and night that shape the planet's climate, and, possibly, its chances of supporting life. Tidal locking may sound like a curse for habitability, but it might not be. On a tidally locked planet, the area between the star-facing side and the dark side, the so-called terminator zone, could have moderate conditions. There, twilight would be eternal, and temperatures might be just right for liquid water. In this way, tides might not only shape oceans, but could also carve out potential havens for life on distant worlds. Tidal forces can also be destructive. When a star wanders too close to a black hole, the difference in gravity across its diameter can become so extreme that the star is literally torn apart in an event called spaghettification. Streams of stellar material spiral into the black hole, forming a luminous disk. While dramatic, this is just tides on an astronomical scale. The same stretching force that moves water on Earth, only applied to entire stars. Even within our own solar system, planets and moons bear the scars of tidal stress. Miranda, a small moon of Uranus, shows bizarre cliffs and ridges that may be the result of past tidal flexing. Triton, Neptune's largest moon, has geysers thought to be powered by internal heat from ancient tidal activity. Wherever we look, gravity's tug of war leaves its mark, whether in fire, ice, or stone. What makes tides so universal is that they are not limited by material. They act on anything with mass, whether water, rock, or gas. The same principle explains why binary stars can distort one another into teardrop shapes, why galaxies can warp when they pass close together, and why small moons can maintain liquid oceans billions of kilometers from the sun. Tides are gravity's way of reminding us that nothing in the universe is truly rigid. Everything stretches, bends, and shifts under the influence of its neighbours. It's also striking how tides can both nurture and destroy. On Europa and Enceladus, they may sustain hidden oceans where life could thrive. On Io, they drive volcanic eruptions so violent that no creature could survive on its surface. On Earth, they have guided evolution and human history. On distant exoplanets, they may determine whether entire worlds are habitable or barren. Tides are not just background forces, they are shapers of destiny. Standing on a beach, watching waves advance and retreat, it is easy to feel that tides are a purely local phenomenon. Yet that rise and fall is part of a much grander pattern. The same gravitational principle is sculpting moons, fueling geysers, locking planets, and shredding stars. In this sense, every ripple on Earth's shore is connected to a cosmic story. The moon tugs at the sea, Jupiter tugs at Io, Saturn tugs at Enceladus, and black holes tug at entire suns. The scale changes, but the principle remains. Tides across the solar system remind us that gravity is not just a static pull. It is dynamic, restless, and endlessly creative. It bends orbits, heats interiors, and creates environments both hostile and hospitable. Whether in the icy spray of Enceladus or the volcanic fires of Io, tides are at work, invisible but undeniable. They are the universe's way of showing that even in silence, forces are always at play, shaping worlds in ways both dramatic and delicate. To look at the moon and think only of Earth's tides is to see just one chapter of a vast story. The truth is that tides are a universal script, written wherever gravity acts unevenly, and that means they are everywhere. From the smallest tide pool on our coast to the destruction of stars at the edge of black holes, tides are proof that the cosmos is never truly still. They are the quiet hand of gravity, stretching across space, pulling worlds into motion, and reminding us that the rhythm of the sea is, in fact, the rhythm of the universe itself. There are forces in nature that we measure with instruments, and there are forces that we measure with the imagination. The tides have always belonged to both categories. On one level, they are the predictable rise and fall of the sea, a rhythm that can be timed and charted. On another level, they are a symbol, a mirror for human thought and emotion. From the earliest poems to the most modern music, the sight of water advancing and retreating under the light of the moon has inspired artists, writers, and dreamers to find meaning in the motion of the sea. William Shakespeare is often cited as one of the first great voices to use tides as metaphor. In Julius Caesar, he wrote of a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. It was a line that captured not only the literal movement of water, but also the sense of opportunity and inevitability. Just as a sailor must launch when the tide is high, so must a person act when fortune presents itself. For Shakespeare, the tide was more than water. It was destiny itself, pulling human lives along with the same inevitability that the moon pulls the ocean. In other plays, he returned to the sea as a stage for emotion. The ebb and flow of water symbolized the waxing and waning of love, the rise and fall of hope, and the relentless passage of time. It was imagery his audiences knew well. Many of them lived close to rivers and coasts, where the tide was not a distant concept but a daily fact. For them, the language of water rising and falling carried both practicality and poetry. The Romantic poets of the 19th century found the tide to be an especially fertile source of imagery. Lord Byron, staring out at the sea, spoke of the ocean as eternal and unconquerable, its tides reminders of nature's supremacy over humankind. Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote of waves as symbols of freedom and rebellion, reflecting his own political passions. For John Keats, the tide became a metaphor for the transience of beauty and the inevitability of change. The Romantics lived in an age of industrial upheaval, and the timeless rhythm of the tide offered both solace and perspective, reminding them that the moon's pull outlasted any factory or machine. In America, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow penned "The Tide Rises, the Tide Falls," a gentle meditation on life and death. In his verses, the tide's eternal rhythm contrasts with the fleeting steps of human life. A traveller walks the shore, leaving footprints that are soon erased by the advancing waves. The sea continues its cycle, indifferent to human comings and goings. For Longfellow, the tide was both comfort and reminder. Though individuals fade, the larger rhythm endures. The link between tides and music has also been strong. Composers have often tried to capture the movement of the sea in sound. Claude Debussy's La Mer swells and subsides like waves, a musical reflection of the water's rhythm. Ralph Vaughan Williams, in works such as A Sea Symphony, set verses about the ocean to soaring orchestral lines, making tides part of a cosmic hymn. Even modern popular music cannot resist the pull. Songs speak of emotions rising and falling like the tide, of love flowing in and out, of lives swept along by forces larger than themselves. The metaphor is so natural that it slips into lyrics almost unnoticed. Visual artists too have been captivated. Painters of the Dutch Golden Age depicted harbours at low tide, ships leaning against the mud. Japanese ukiyo-e prints captured tidal landscapes with an elegance that fused science and art. The famous Great Wave off Kanagawa by Hokusai is not a tidal wave in the scientific sense, but its curling form and implied motion carry the same awe inspired by the sea's changing face. Impressionists later sought to capture the shifting colours of tidal flats, painting the same views under different lights and tides to show how nothing ever looks the same twice. Beyond art, tides have been woven into myth and legend that continue to influence literature. In Celtic stories, the sea god Manannan was said to control the tides with his magical power. In Japanese folklore, the tide jewels granted by the gods Ibisu and Ryujin could command the ebb and flow of the ocean. Such tales reinforce the idea of the tide as something not only physical but mystical, a force that belonged to both nature and story. Modern writers, from Virginia Woolf to Margaret Atwood, have inherited this symbolic tradition, using the sea's rhythm to evoke memory, desire, or inevitability. The moon itself has always been central to this artistic current. Its phases, reflected in poetry and song, provide a visible reminder of the passage of time. Ancient storytellers connected the moon's cycle to the pulse of life, fertility, and renewal. The tide became its companion image, a breathing of the earth in harmony with the sky. In cultures across the world, from Polynesian navigators to Norse poets, the moon and tide were inseparable symbols of rhythm and order. The imagination did not need equations to see the link. The evidence was plain to the eyes of those who lived by the shore. In the modern age, even as science explains tides with the precision of gravity and orbital mechanics, the imagination has not let go of its metaphors. Writers still use the tide to describe emotion, change, and inevitability. A rising tide lifts all boats, we say, or a turning tide signals a change of fortune. Politicians borrow the phrase to suggest momentum, lovers borrow it to suggest passion, and storytellers borrow it to suggest fate. The metaphor has never lost its currency, because the image of water moving to the moon is endlessly powerful. The enduring influence of tides in art and imagination reflects something deeper about human nature. We're drawn to cycles, to rhythms that mirror our own experiences of growth, decline, and renewal. The tide is a perfect example, predictable yet changeable, gentle yet powerful, ordinary yet sublime. It's no wonder that poets, musicians and artists return to it again and again. The tide is both subject and symbol, both literal and metaphorical, both natural law and human dream. Standing at the edge of the sea, one cannot help but feel the dual nature of the tide. It is a scientific certainty, explainable down to the centimetre. Yet it is also something more, a movement that invites reflection, metaphor and art. Shakespeare saw it as opportunity, the Romantics as eternity, Longfellow as mortality, Debussy as sound, Hokusai as image. Each found in the tide a mirror of the human condition. The moon's pull on the oceans has therefore become a pull on the imagination as well. It stirs not only the water, but the mind, shaping the way we write, paint, sing, and dream. Science explains the mechanics, but imagination gives the tide's meaning, transforming the simple rise and fall of water into a symbol that has endured for centuries. The tide is not only the moon's gift to the seas, but also the moon's gift to art, an eternal rhythm that continues to inspire as surely as it continues to flow. For as long as humans have set sail, the tides have been both companion and challenge. The sea is never a static surface, and those who ventured onto it quickly learned that understanding the rhythm of the moon was as essential as reading the stars. Without the tides, many of the great voyages of discovery, trade and migration would have unfolded very differently. The history of navigation and exploration is inseparable from the knowledge of how the waters rise and fall. The first great navigators to master the Pacific Ocean were the Polynesians. Long before Europeans crossed the Atlantic, Polynesian sailors had developed a sophisticated system of ocean knowledge that blended observation, memory, and oral tradition. They did not rely on compasses or charts, but on an intimate familiarity with the movements of the sea and sky. Tides were part of this system. Knowing when a lagoon would be open to canoes, or when strong currents would flow between islands, made the difference between success and disaster. The moon's cycle was carefully observed, its phases marking when voyages should begin and when fishing would be most fruitful. A Polynesian navigator could read the subtle cues of swell and current, linking them to tidal cycles and using them to cross thousands of kilometres of open water with astonishing accuracy. Elsewhere in the world, coastal peoples developed their own tidal law. In the Indian Ocean, Arab traders sailing their dhows timed departures to coincide with favourable monsoon winds, but also paid attention to tidal currents in harbours and straits. The Persian Gulf, with its tricky shallows, demanded a keen sense of how the tide would shift the depth beneath a keel. In East Asia, Chinese sailors and fishermen recorded the cycles of the moon and their effects on local waters. Their detailed knowledge was incorporated into almanacs that guided not just navigation, but also commerce and agriculture. When European explorers began their age of discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries, tides quickly proved to be both obstacle and ally. Christopher Columbus, navigating the Caribbean, relied on local knowledge of tides and currents provided by indigenous peoples, without which his charts would have been far less reliable. Vasco da Gama, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, had to contend with powerful tidal currents that could either speed a ship along or hold it back for days. For Ferdinand Magellan's fleet attempting the first circumnavigation, entering and exiting narrow straits meant waiting for the right tide, lest ships be dashed against rocks or caught in swirling waters. In northern Europe, the importance of tides was magnified by geography. The English Channel, with its powerful tidal currents, could make or break a voyage. Knowledge of the local cycle allowed ships to slip into or out of port at the right moment. Dutch merchants, whose wealth depended on controlling trade routes, became masters of tidal prediction. Harbours in Amsterdam and Rotterdam had to contend with fluctuations that dictated when ships could be loaded and when they must wait. This mastery gave the Dutch Republic a vital edge during its golden age of exploration and commerce. Mapping the tides became an exploration in itself. Early chart makers recorded not only coastlines but also tidal currents, drawing arrows to indicate direction and strength. These tidal charts were invaluable to sailors, helping them plan passages through complex waters. In Britain, the Admiralty produced increasingly detailed charts during the 18th and 19th centuries, often based on meticulous local observations by naval officers. Knowing where the tide would carry you was as important as knowing the shape of the coast. For explorers venturing into unfamiliar regions, the ability to anticipate tidal patterns could determine whether they reached their destination or were swept disastrously off course. The Arctic and Antarctic expeditions of the 19th and early 20th centuries also encountered the influence of tides. Sea ice was not just moved by wind but by tidal forces, opening or closing channels unpredictably. Explorers like Ernest Shackleton and Robert Peary had to reckon with tides when planning routes, hauling supplies, or anchoring ships. Even in these remote and frozen regions, the pull of the moon was inescapable, shifting the ice in rhythms that echoed the coasts of warmer seas. In river exploration, tides were equally important. The great estuaries of the Amazon, the Ganges, and the Thames all presented challenges to those who sought to navigate them. Tidal bores, with their sudden surges of water rushing upstream, could help carry explorers inland or wreck their boats if misjudged. Understanding these surges meant learning not only from instruments, but from the local inhabitants who had long lived in harmony with the tide's behaviour. The link between tides and exploration was not always about physical movement, it was also about timing and strategy. Armadas set sail with the tide, fleets invaded with the tide, and merchants launched with the tide. Missing the right window could mean weeks of delay, wasted provisions, or even disaster. The moon, though unmentioned in official accounts, was the hidden partner in every decision. Even after the invention of the compass and the chronometer, tides remained vital. Navigators could calculate their longitude and latitude with precision, but if they did not know the tide, they might still run aground in a shallow estuary or misjudge the speed of their vessel. The Admiralty tide tables, first published in the early 19th century, became indispensable tools for captains across the world. They distilled centuries of observation into neat predictions, allowing explorers to harness the moon's pull rather than fight it. Polynesian voyagers, Arab traders, Chinese sailors, European explorers all shared one truth: the tide could not be ignored. It shaped routes, dictated timing, and often decided success or failure. The moon, distant and silent, was always in the background of human exploration, turning the oceans into a living map. Today, satellites and computer models provide tidal predictions with astonishing precision. Ships can navigate shallow waters with electronic charts that display not only depth, but also real-time tidal data. Yet the principle remains unchanged. Every voyage, from a fishing boat leaving a small harbour to a container ship crossing oceans, depends on the rhythm set by the moon. Looking back, it is remarkable to realise how much of human history on the seas was guided by this silent partner. The spread of Polynesian culture across the Pacific, the flourishing of trade across the Indian Ocean, the voyages of discovery that linked continents, all of them were shaped by tides. The moon's gravitational pull may be invisible, but its role in navigation and exploration is written into the maps and routes of history. The story of exploration is not just about daring captains or sturdy ships. It is also about timing a departure to the rising tide, about slipping into a harbour when the moon says it is safe, about trusting a rhythm that has guided sailors for thousands of years. The great voyages of the past were carried not only by wind and courage, but also by the patient, predictable pull of the moon, the navigator no one ever saw but everyone relied upon. Most of the time, the tides are gentle companions. They roll in and out with quiet regularity, offering fishermen their harvests and children their sandcastles. Yet the same moon that tugs softly at the oceans can also, under the wrong circumstances, contribute to tragedy. When the tides combine with storms, the results can be devastating. The rise and fall of the sea, normally so predictable, can turn into a weapon of destruction. This is the story of tides as both ally and adversary, gentle rhythm and dangerous surge. At the heart of many coastal disasters lies the storm surge. A storm surge is not a tide in itself, but rather a temporary rise in sea level, driven by strong winds and low atmospheric pressure during a cyclone, hurricane, or typhoon. The winds push enormous amounts of water toward the shore, while the drop in air pressure allows the sea to bulge upward. On its own, this surge is dangerous enough. But when it arrives during high tide, especially a spring tide when the sun and moon line up to amplify the ocean's rise, the result can be catastrophic flooding. The predictable pulse of the moon becomes an accomplice to the chaos of the atmosphere. History provides sobering examples. In 1953, a fierce storm struck the North Sea, coinciding with a spring tide. The combined effect overwhelmed coastal defences in the Netherlands, Belgium, and eastern England. Entire villages were flooded, thousands of lives were lost, and vast tracts of farmland were ruined. The disaster was a stark reminder that the moon's steady pull, harmless under ordinary conditions, can become deadly when it joins forces with the winds. In response, the Netherlands built the Delta Works, an ambitious system of barriers and dikes designed to keep the sea at bay. Yet even with modern engineering, the memory of that night lingers like a shadow cast by the tide itself. Bangladesh offers another haunting chapter. Situated on the low-lying delta of the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers, the country is acutely vulnerable to storm surges. In 1970, the Bola cyclone struck with ferocious winds and a surge that arrived on top of a high tide. The waters surged inland, submerging villages and leaving devastation in their wake. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of people perished, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history. Once again, the convergence of storm and tide magnified the destruction, turning a storm into an unspeakable catastrophe. The pattern repeats across centuries. In 1789, the Great Storm of Appalachia Bay pushed waters far inland in Florida. In 1821, a hurricane struck New York City, its surge flooding the streets of Lower Manhattan. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina's storm surge combined with high tide to breach levees in New Orleans, drowning entire neighborhoods. In each case, the moon's influence was subtle but crucial, lifting the baseline of the sea just enough to tip disaster into catastrophe. Science helps explain why this combination is so potent. A storm surge adds a temporary bulge of water, but the tide determines the starting point. If the tide is low, the extra water may be absorbed by bays and estuaries with less damage. If the tide is high, the surge rides on top of it, spilling over seawalls and sweeping inland. The difference can be measured in meters, but those meters mean the difference between inconvenience and disaster. The moon and the sun, with their predictable cycles, sometimes arrive at exactly the wrong time, amplifying the chaos born of storms. Flooding is the most visible danger, but not the only one. When tides and storms combine, they reshape coastlines, erode beaches and scatter debris. Harbours may be wrecked, ships torn from their moorings, and saltwater forced into farmland, ruining crops. In some regions, communities have learned to read the signs, evacuating when a surge coincides with a high tide. Yet even the best predictions cannot always protect against the sheer force of nature when wind, water and moon align. The duality of the tide is striking. It is the same force that gently shapes tidal pools and nourishes coastal ecosystems, yet it can also raise walls of water that sweep away entire towns. This contrast has left a deep impression on human imagination. In folklore, the tide is often personified as capricious, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel. Stories speak of sea gods angered, of moons pulling recklessly at the waves, of waters rising not just predictably but with vengeance. The science is clear, but the emotional truth is equally vivid. To live by the sea is to live with a partner whose moods cannot always be controlled. Modern technology has given us new tools to anticipate these dangers. Satellites monitor the rise and fall of the oceans with extraordinary precision, while supercomputers simulate the interplay of tides, winds, and pressure. Tidal gauges placed around the world provide real-time data, feeding into prediction models that warn of storm surges days in advance. Coastal cities now rely on these forecasts to prepare defences, close floodgates, and evacuate vulnerable populations. Yet despite all our progress, the sea still finds ways to surprise, reminding us that prediction is not prevention. In the context of climate change, the relationship between tides and disasters is becoming even more urgent. Rising sea levels mean that the baseline is creeping upward, so that even ordinary high tides now reach further inland. When storm surges arrive on top of this higher platform, the devastation is magnified. Events that were once considered once in a century are becoming more common. The moon's pull has not changed, but the world it acts upon has. The tide that once seemed eternal is being reshaped by the warming planet, turning what was once routine into risk. Despite the dangers, there is something profoundly humbling about the fact that the same gravitational partnership that inspires poetry and guides sailors can also unleash destruction. It is a reminder that nature is not divided neatly into helpful and harmful, gentle and cruel. The tide simply is, an impartial force that can nurture or overwhelm depending on the circumstances. To recognize its dangers is not to vilify it, but to respect it. History has shown us both sides. In calm harbours, the tide has supported trade and exploration. In tidal flats, it has provided food for countless generations. Yet in storm surges, it has also swept away lives and rewritten coastlines. The moon's pull is constant, but its consequences are shaped by wind, weather, and circumstance. This duality makes it one of the most powerful and fascinating forces on Earth, a partner in both creation and destruction. To stand on a shoreline after a disaster, with debris scattered and homes washed away, is to see the tide at its most unforgiving. Yet even then, the water will retreat, the beach will reappear, and the cycle will continue. The tide does not stop for tragedy. It keeps its rhythm regardless of human grief. That persistence is both cruel and comforting. The same waves that destroyed will also return to nourish, to carry fish, to shape sands. The moon will not cease its pull, and life in time will adapt again. Tides remind us that gentleness and danger are not opposites, but parts of the same whole. The moon's pull can cradle tide pools or topple seawalls, inspire poetry or cause tragedy. Its power lies not in choosing one role over the other, but in being both at once. To live with tides is to live with that paradox, a rhythm as dependable as breathing, and as unpredictable as the weather it sometimes joins forces with. It is a partnership we can never control, but one we can learn to understand, respect, and prepare for, knowing that the moon will always pull, and the sea will always answer. When we think of tides, we usually picture waves creeping up a beach or harbours filling and emptying like the lungs of the sea. Yet tides are not only sculptors of coastlines, they are also sculptors of time. Each rise and fall transfers energy between Earth and its moon, and that exchange has been quietly lengthening our days for billions of years. The moon, by tugging at the oceans, has become a planetary timekeeper, slowing Earth's spin and reshaping the very rhythm of life on our planet. To understand how this works, picture Earth's oceans as vast blankets of water that try to bulge outward in the direction of the moon. Because Earth rotates beneath these bulges, the tidal swell doesn't sit perfectly in line with the moon. Instead, friction between water and land drags the bulges slightly ahead of the moon's position. This small misalignment matters. It means Earth's rotation pulls on the bulge while the moon's gravity tugs it back, creating a constant tug of war. The outcome is the gradual transfer of energy. Earth loses a fraction of its rotational speed, and the moon gains a fraction of orbital distance. The effect today is tiny on human scales. High-precision measurements using laser beams bounced off reflectors left by Apollo astronauts show that the Moon is drifting away at about 3.5 centimeters per year. At the same time, Earth's day is lengthening by about 2 milliseconds per century, hardly noticeable in the span of a lifetime. Yet across the immensity of geological time, these small increments accumulate into sweeping changes. Fossil records provide remarkable evidence of this process. Ancient corals, clams, and stromatolites grow in daily and seasonal layers, like tree rings. By counting these microscopic bands, scientists can determine how many days once fit into a year. 400 million years ago, during the Devonian period, corals recorded about 400 daily rings per year. Since Earth's orbit around the Sun has not changed significantly, this means each day was only about 21.5 hours long. The Moon was closer, the tides were stronger, and Earth spun more quickly on its axis. Go back even further, and the effect becomes even more dramatic. Billions of years ago, Earth's day may have lasted only 6 to 10 hours. The young Moon loomed larger in the sky, raising colossal tides that surged across the planet. Those immense tides would have generated enormous friction, transferring rotational energy into the Moon's orbit at a rapid pace. The process has slowed since then, but it continues to this day, quietly ticking away the seconds and stretching Earth's rotation like a clock that runs a little more slowly each century. The implications for life are profound. The length of the day dictates how sunlight and darkness are divided, shaping circadian rhythms in everything from microbes to mammals. Early life likely evolved under much shorter days, with rapid cycles of light and dark. Over time, as days lengthened, organisms adapted to slower rhythms. Even our own biology is an echo of this cosmic relationship. The fact that humans operate comfortably on a 24-hour cycle is not coincidence, but the result of billions of years of tides steadily slowing Earth's spin. The Moon has therefore acted as a kind of cosmic metronome, keeping time not with ticking seconds but with the steady breaking of Earth's rotation. Without this tidal friction, our planet might spin much faster today, giving us shorter days and more chaotic winds and weather. The Moon's grip has helped stabilise not only the length of the day, but also Earth's tilt, which governs the seasons. In a very real sense, the Moon has been shaping the tempo of life since life began. This tidal timekeeping also has a future. The process of lengthening days is ongoing, and in the far future, Earth may become tidally locked with the Moon. Just as the Moon now shows only one face to Earth, Earth itself could one day show only one face to the Moon. At that point, a single day would last as long as a lunar orbit, about 47 times longer than our current day. One hemisphere would see the Moon fixed in the sky, while the other would never see it at all. Such a scenario is billions of years away, and long before it arrives, the Sun will have transformed into a red giant. Yet the fact that it is possible shows how deeply the Moon's tidal influence is intertwined with Earth's destiny. The story of tidal timekeeping also reaches beyond Earth. Other worlds show how tides can shape rotation. Many moons in the solar system are already tidally locked to their planets, always presenting the same face, just as our Moon does to us. Mercury, though not fully locked, rotates in a resonance with its orbit around the Sun, completing 3 rotations for every 2 orbits. This too is the work of tidal forces. Across the cosmos, tides act like patient clockmakers, adjusting spins and orbits over billions of years until celestial bodies settle into stable relationships. What makes Earth's story especially fascinating is how directly tides have influenced both geology and biology. Stronger ancient tides may have stirred chemical soups where early life began. They may have shaped the cycles of light and dark that moulded evolution. And as days stretched, ecosystems adjusted to slower rhythms, leading eventually to the 24-hour patterns that govern human sleep and activity. In a sense, every time we glance at a clock, we are acknowledging the Moon's role in shaping the length of our day. There is also something poetic about this invisible mechanism. Each wave that laps ashore carries with it not only water, but also a whisper of lost energy, drained from Earth's spin and given to the moon. Every tide is a transaction in a cosmic economy, one that slowly alters the length of our days and the distance to our satellite. Time itself is being rewritten in increments too small to notice, but relentless in their accumulation. The moon, then, is not only the sculptor of tides, but also the architect of time. It has stretched our days from hours to the cycle we know. It continues to push itself farther away, and it will keep shaping the rhythm of Earth long after humanity has come and gone. To watch the tide is to watch the clock of the cosmos at work, not one that ticks with seconds, but one that ticks with centuries and millennia. The next time the tide rolls in, it is worth remembering that its motion is not only about water moving up a beach, it is also about Earth's spin slowing fraction by fraction, about the moon drifting away centimetre by centimetre, and about time itself lengthening in the quiet background of existence. The moon's pull, so gentle and so steady, is the reason a day is 24 hours long and not far shorter. It is the reason corals recorded hundreds of days in a year long ago, and the reason that billions of years from now, days will stretch into lengths we can scarcely imagine. Tides remind us that time is not just something we count with clocks and calendars. It is something written into the turning of Earth itself, a rhythm set by the pull of the moon. In this sense, every dawn and every sunset is part of the same story. The gradual slowing of a planet, the lengthening of days, and the steady beat of a cosmic timekeeper that has been guiding Earth for over 4 billion years. The moon hangs above us like a lantern, steady and patient, watching over the restless waters of the Earth. For all of human history, it has been the silent guardian of the sea, pulling and releasing, guiding the tides in a rhythm as old as the planet itself. To stand on the shore and listen to the waves creeping forward and then sliding back again is to hear the heartbeat of the world, set by the hand of the moon. This rhythm is not only physical but deeply poetic, a reminder that even in silence the cosmos composes music. There is something profoundly calming about the certainty of tides. The sun may blaze and set, storms may howl, empires may rise and fall, but the waters will always come in and go out. Twice each day, the moon whispers across the oceans, and they respond with a bowing of their heads, a surge toward the land, and then a retreat. It is a dialogue without words, a conversation of pull and surrender. This constancy makes the tide one of the planet's most meditative forces, a reminder that change itself can be steady, that movement can be predictable, that time itself can be rhythmic. The heart is a useful metaphor. Just as blood pulses through the body with each beat, so too does water flow across the Earth with each cycle of the tide. Every coast is a vein, every ocean a chamber, the whole planet breathing in tune with the moon. When the tide comes in, it is as though Earth takes a deep inhale. When it falls away, the exhale follows. Life has evolved to this rhythm. Crabs scuttle with the receding water. Birds feed on the flats when the tide is low, and fish ride the rising waves into estuaries. Even the timing of coral spawning or the hatching of turtles aligns with the moon's pull. The tide is not just Earth's heartbeat, it is also its metronome, setting tempo for the dance of life. This relationship has always invited reflection. Poets and philosophers have long gazed at the moon and the sea and seen more than mechanics. They have seen companionship. The sea is restless, vast, and often wild. The moon is calm, steady, and remote. Together they create balance, the one anchoring the other, the one shaping the other's identity. Without the moon, the sea would still move, but it would lack the deep rhythm that has defined it for billions of years. The moon in turn would still shine, but it would lack the great mirror of water reflecting its light and answering its call. There is also humility in this connection. We are small creatures, standing on the edge of a vast ocean, staring at a sphere almost 400,000 kilometres away, and yet we're bound to both by the same thread of gravity. The pull that moves the seas also moves us, tugging subtly at our bodies, influencing our calendars, our myths, our art. It is a reminder that we are not separate from the universe but part of it, drawn into its rhythms whether we notice them or not. The poetry of tides lies in their duality. They are both gentle and immense, both predictable and powerful. The same tide that leaves seashells glistening on a beach can also flood cities when combined with storms. The same moon that inspires lovers and artists is also the author of erosion, pulling at cliffs until they crumble into the surf. To see tides only as danger is to miss their beauty. To see them only as beauty is to forget their power. They embody the paradox of nature itself, nurturing, destructive, constant and changeable all at once. At night, when the moon is full and bright, the tide feels almost ceremonial. The sea gleams silver, as though dressed in robes of light, and the waves march in solemn procession. At new moon, when the sky is dark and the moon hides its face, the tide still answers, rising higher or falling lower, as though the absence of light sharpens the pull of gravity. It is in these extremes, spring tides, that the dialogue between earth, moon and sun is most profound. They are moments when the cosmos seems to announce its presence with extra emphasis, reminding us that the sea listens to more than one voice. If the tide is Earth's heartbeat, then time itself is its song. Each cycle stretches back into prehistory, when the moon was closer and the days were shorter. Ancient seas roared with tides far greater than today's, reshaping coasts and stirring the chemical soups where life began. Over the ages the rhythm has slowed, the heartbeat has softened, but it continues without pause. The moon is still conducting, still guiding the oceans in their endless breathing. The history of the world has unfolded to this background rhythm, from the first bacteria to the rise of civilizations. Humans too have taken comfort in the rhythm. Fishermen planned their work to the tides, sailors trusted them to guide ships, and communities along coasts built their rituals around the moon's phases. Even when we no longer depend on the tide for survival in the same way, its poetry still calls to us. We go to the sea to feel grounded, to be reminded of cycles larger than ourselves. We find peace in the steady rhythm, reassurance in the endless repetition. The tide tells us that even in a world of chaos there are patterns that endure. To watch the tide is to meditate on impermanence and permanence together. Each wave is different, yet the pattern is the same. Each tide comes and goes, yet the cycle is unbroken. The shoreline may change, the rocks may wear down, but the tide will keep breathing as long as the moon pulls. There is comfort in that kind of eternity. It whispers that change does not always mean loss. Sometimes change is simply rhythm, the pulse of existence continuing on. In this way, the moon becomes more than a satellite. It becomes a guardian of balance, a keeper of time, a companion to the sea. It has no voice, no will, and yet it shapes the world with its invisible hand. It holds the oceans close but never claims them, allowing them to move, to breathe, to remind us of the beauty of cycles. To imagine Earth without the moon is to imagine a world without this poetry, a world without the great breathing of the sea. The tides are Earth's heartbeat, and the moon is its quiet conductor. Together they have created a rhythm that has endured for billions of years and will continue for billions more long after we're gone. Standing on a shore at dusk, listening to the waves creep forward and fall back again, is to place yourself inside that rhythm, to feel for a moment that your own heartbeat is part of the same song. The moon pulls, the sea answers, and in that exchange lies one of the most profound and poetic rhythms of the universe. The moon has been with Earth for almost as long as there has been an Earth to orbit. To us it often appears changeless, a pale lantern suspended in the night sky, rising and setting with quiet predictability. Yet its influence is far from passive. Over billions of years, the moon has been an active shaper of our world, not through storms or cataclysm, but through the steady persistence of gravity. Its pull is subtle, almost invisible, yet it has sculpted oceans, guided ecosystems, influenced human history, and even lengthened the measure of our days. The moon is not merely a light in the darkness, it is one of the great architects of Earth's story. Consider how tides alone weave together so many strands of life. The simple act of water rising and falling twice each day has carved coastlines, filled estuaries with nutrients, and created the intertidal zones where life had to adapt to extremes. Those zones may even have been among the first classrooms where early organisms learned to survive on land. What looks like a gentle wave lapping at the shore is, in truth, part of an ancient rhythm that has shaped evolution itself. Without the moon's constant pull, life on Earth might have followed a very different path, perhaps slower, perhaps less diverse, perhaps without the same richness that the tides made possible. The moon has also been a compass and a clock for humanity. Early civilizations noticed the link between its phases and the tides, and they built their calendars around it. Farmers planted and harvested by its cycles. Fishermen cast their nets with an eye to the full moon. Navigators read the tide as carefully as they read the stars. Great voyages, from Polynesian crossings of the Pacific to European expeditions into the unknown, succeeded in part because sailors knew when the tide would turn. In times of war, generals studied the lunar cycle to plan invasions. In times of peace, merchants relied on tide tables to keep trade flowing. The moon, often unacknowledged, has been a silent strategist in the story of civilization. Its influence extends even further. Through tidal friction, the moon has been steadily slowing Earth's rotation, stretching our days from just a handful of hours in the deep past to the 24-hour cycle we know today. It continues to do so, lengthening each day by tiny increments, pushing itself farther from us centimetre by centimetre. This slow reshaping of time is one of the most extraordinary consequences of tides. Every dawn, every sunset, every heartbeat we count in minutes and hours is tied to the moon's patient work. Time as we live it is, in part, the legacy of the tides. Even beyond Earth, the story of tides unfolds across the cosmos. Jupiter's moon. Io erupts with volcanoes driven by tidal heating. Europa and Enceladus conceal hidden oceans beneath their ice, kept liquid by tidal flexing. Exoplanets circling close to their stars may be tidally locked, forever showing one face to their sun, their climates and prospects for life, determined by the same gravitational principles that move Earth's seas. Tides are not a local quirk, but a universal language, spoken wherever gravity stretches and pulls. They remind us that the relationship between Earth and Moon is just one verse in a far larger cosmic poem. And through all of this, tides have also been mirrors for human thought. Poets, musicians, and artists have looked to the sea's rise and fall and found metaphors for love, loss, opportunity, and eternity. Shakespeare wrote of fortunes taken at the flood. Longfellow reflected on the tide as a symbol of life and death. Painters captured ships leaning against mudflats at low tide, or waves glittering in moonlight. Musicians set the rhythm of the sea into their works, trying to capture in sound what the moon writes in water. Science may explain the mechanics, but art captures the meaning, showing how the same gravitational pull that moves oceans can move the human heart. The tide is therefore both fact and symbol. It is an equation written in gravity, but it is also a story told in poetry. It is a cycle predictable to the second, yet also an endless source of metaphor. It belongs as much to physics as it does to imagination, and in that duality lies its beauty. The moon has never been content to remain only in the sky. It lives also in our oceans, in our myths, in our music, and even in our sense of time itself. There is, too, a lesson in humility. When tides combine with storms, their power can become destructive, flooding cities and sweeping away entire communities. When amplified by geography, they can turn into tidal bores or whirlpools of astonishing force. These reminders show that the moon's influence is not always gentle. The same steady pull that nurtures ecosystems can also contribute to disaster. Yet even here, the story is not one of cruelty but of impartiality. The tide does not choose, it simply responds to gravity, and humanity must learn to live with it, respecting its dual nature as both life-giver and threat. Looking forward, the story of tides continues to evolve. The moon's slow retreat will weaken them over eons, changing ecosystems and perhaps altering the course of life once again. At the same time, human ingenuity seeks to harness them, building barrages, lagoons and underwater turbines to turn their predictability into clean energy. The same rhythm that guided ancient fishermen may one day light modern cities. The moon, without lifting a finger, becomes an energy provider, a celestial partner in our search for sustainability. When all of these threads are tied together, a picture emerges of the moon not as a passive ornament, but as an active companion. It has guided life, shaped history, measured time, and continues to influence the future. The tides are its signature, written on every shore every day. They are at once the evidence of its power and the poetry of its presence. To sit by the sea and watch the tide roll in is therefore to witness more than water moving. It is to see the whole story of Earth and Moon enacted before your eyes. It is to glimpse the invisible strings of gravity that tie planet and satellite together. It is to feel, in the sound of waves, the passage of deep time and the persistence of cosmic rhythms. It is to understand that the moon, far away and silent, is intimately present in every grain of wet sand. And in the end, there is comfort in this constancy. Empires may crumble, climates may shift, technologies may rise and fall, but the tide will still answer to the moon. The waves will still breathe in and out, keeping a rhythm that outlasts generations. To listen to the sea is to hear the earth itself in conversation with the sky. It is a reminder that the universe is not chaos alone, but also pattern, order, and enduring relationship. So when you next hear the water advancing up a shore or slipping quietly back again, pause for a moment. That motion is more than waves. It is the echo of the moon's embrace, the steady heartbeat of a planet guided by its companion. The moon is not just a light in the night sky. It is a patient sculptor, a guardian of oceans, a keeper of rhythms, and a shaper of time. And as long as it continues to pull, the seas will continue to answer, rising and falling in their eternal conversation with the moon.